a new creation based on what used to be part of some other handbooks. Just some basic stuff like the policy review cycle. And then I added a whole bunch of stuff that was coming from the school board evaluation late summer, early fall. I got to be honest, I spend most of my time just trying to get that information in the document. And I have to tell you, as I was copying and pasting or rearranging, I was sitting there thinking, I'm not sure if the board necessarily would want to do these things. And so I'm just wondering if this is, maybe I could take some suggestions or read through what people are saying. But I think the new board's going to have to really analyze this, just to be fair. So what are your thoughts about it?
Can I ask a question here first? Am I right here? I printed the administrative procedures. Is that what we're on?
Nope, school board procedures.
Because that was the link that came from Lisa, so I maybe didn't research the right stuff here.
Oh, we'll talk about admin procedures too.
Okay,
Yep.
I gotta find the school board procedures because I did not do my homework then. I'm sorry.
Well,
Was
and
that
again,
in?
Heidi
Where is that
forwarded
at?
a bunch of comments, about it. And I haven't gone through each one, but, I can certainly do that, over the next month or two.
Well, I can go over it, but where's the document at? Is it in our handbook or where do I find it?
Let's see.
It's in an email from Karsten that
Which
came
one?
on,
It does, the email says administrative procedures.
well, there's two.
Oh.
There's two emails. One was administrative procedures and one was school board procedures.
Oh, yeah.
I don't have the, wait,
Maybe I messed up.
no, I don't think so. Here it is. You sent it to us. Yeah, you sent it to us on,
Wednesday.
yep, Wednesday.
Yeah, then it was supposed to be
Okay.
loaded.
Two of them, but
Yeah.
Oh, latest version of school board procedures. Okay,
Thank you.
was there a link to it then?
That was
Yeah, let
loaded
me,
this morning. Or
this, yeah, on the very bottom. A PDF.
All right, I'm sorry.
No. No, I'm sorry. I put it up on a Wednesday before Thanksgiving break. There's no way I would expect, people to be reviewing that word for word for a meeting on Monday.
Why not?
So, right, exactly. Yeah, why not?
Right.
Um,
Easy enough.
But would you guys be okay if we deferred a thorough discussion about this until the new board takes over? And then in the meantime, I could take Heidi's comments and make some adjustments or highlight some things that might be leading to some questions.
Yeah, I was gonna say what MSBA sends you, is that supposed to be written in stone or is that best practice? Suggestions.
That would be MSBA's perspective on best practice.
Right. So prefacing all of that with this is MSBA's, their idea of how boards should be run, their idea of how, things, but Red Wing has its own culture with a lot of caveats. And so to try to streamline us and get us focused more in a board forum would be a nice thing to be able to do with some of Red Wing's eccentricities that make us unique, but following that.
Right.
So I think that Heidi's suggestions, should definitely be in there. But it's not a hard and fast document, but it's a good document to have.
Yeah, there might be some things that would be hard and fast, but very few in the document. And I think we'd already know what those hard and fast expectations are.
Right.
I'm just looking, it's a 13-page document apparently, is that correct?
Mhm.
Heidi found a lot of work on this. I just soon tackle it myself, and I think I can keep up with it with 13 pages, having it here, and
Like
Well,
go
and
through
I
it right
think-
now?
I just
I think-
soon go at it. I'm sorry I messed up, but I'll
I think it's valuable to have some input because this document has existed here, but we're trying to find the right home for it. We're trying to develop it into something better or
Yeah.
and I realize when you get on these boards, it's like drinking from a fire hose, but I also believe in at least if you have something to refer back to, because you kind of need a starting point. And, when I started on the board, there was no orientation. I mean, I just kind of wandered and floundered and did what I could and asked a lot of questions. So I think it's helpful to kind of have a starting point for folks so that maybe they can turn back to it, and say, oh yeah, and some of it's concrete. Like I thought we should add language about the evaluation of the superintendent, that there's certain things that we do as per a Minnesota statute that says we have to report out a public summary 2 weeks or the next board meeting we have after we do the evaluation. I mean, that's a concrete thing that we just have to do. But the first time this board came up against it, we had started the superintendent evaluation, and then a new board chair took over for a year. And then he didn't know that he was supposed to report out. So the process got really bungled. And then the newspaper, we actually had to halt a board meeting because the reporter said, well, you need to report out as per statute about a public summary. So it got really clunky because folks didn't know the process because it was still new. So, there's things like that I think, and then I anticipate that the next board will have the final, approval of this. But I think if we could do some digging into it today, we'd at least get that far down the road and then hand it off to the next board. Does that make some sense?
It does make sense, and you're 1,000% correct, Heidi. There are some things that are HAFTAs that we should just. I mean, it shouldn't be a question or a 2-hour conversation at a board meeting. When do we report this out?
Right.
It should be like, go to the answer key.
Yeah.
You've got the answer key. Carson should be like, look, it's on page 7 here. This is how we're supposed to do this.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with you 1,000%.
So I think I've just kind of given my comments, with some of my opinion. And that's things that the new board will have to learn. One of the things I'll mention under the article too, that norms of operation, when we first created the superintendent evaluation system here, we also committed to the annual board self-evaluation, because I felt like if we're looking over Carson, then we're at the top of the food chain here, we need to self-examine ourselves. So to me, those processes kind of go hand in hand. It's really easy to say, well, that person needs to do better, but then you have to look to yourself and say, okay, so what is it I need to work on? Or what does we as a group need to work on, And I think your new board will probably jump right into those equity discussions, which I'm going to say, yay! So anyway, I think that'll kind of, the board self-evaluation to me it's the only vehicle we have control of where we are really honest with ourselves and say, okay, what else do we need to work on? So it's not necessarily it can be about the people at the table, but it also can be about what is it we're missing in our district when it comes to addressing the achievement gap? And how can we as board members direct our work? Should we be doing a book study, which I know isn't like a super popular thing, but some boards do it. Do we all need to have a workshop on this? Or can we access some district resources? And we do that a little bit with our workshops, learning more about the E12, issues and how it works and stuff. But anyway, I'm just really big on the board's self-evaluation piece. So I wanted to and my comment on that was, I think we need to add it to an annual board action list, which is something I would have added in the planning section about what are the things that the board expects to do on a regular basis every year. So the superintendent evaluation one is something that we do here. But when I started, we had none, but now it's a norm here. So that's a good thing, that we're doing that. And then the board self-evaluation is another one that should always just be part of our work every year. So there's just no question that we adopt that type of action plan. And then there's other things. So I'm going to stop there and see if anybody else has some things to add.
And by the way, under continuous improvement in Article 2, there is a reference to annually conduct a self-evaluation of school board operations.
Yep. And I
So-
have that highlighted, but I think it also needs to be in another list because I don't,
Oh,
it's only like right here at the bottom of the
Yeah.
page in one place. I think it needs to be, like I said, under the planning section you have for like different things you're going to tackle administratively. I think there's things that the board should be doing. And I think I put it in this email about, the board should expect building updates and department updates and regular program updates. We always have the budget as part of our planning cycle. That's always in there. Site improvement plans. We ought to always have that. We ought to expect that we're going to do an orientation because this is a lot of stuff for a lot of people that may not have done it before, or you've done it before, this kind of work before, but this is a different format or a different setting, and there's different norms here, right? Community partners updates, the self-evaluation, the board evaluation. So anyway, those are things that, is the board, I know the superintendent knows to do that, but does the board expect that of itself? Do you expect every year to hear some periodic reports from your community partners? Sometimes we get an annual report from like the Redmond Public Schools Foundation. Do you expect that to be an annual thing? Sometimes it's, like this year, it's probably all virtual. It's going to be a list of grants that they gave out. But I always think it's good, especially to establish some relationship and opportunities to express some gratitude in person by the representative or the chair of that organization, because they're giving us, well over $100,000 every year, in different ways. So is that something the board expects on a regular basis? Or do you want to leave those things up to like the board chair? And I think that's some of the philosophy you guys want to think about, and this year has been abnormal, so you can't gauge on what you've experienced this year. But I think we should be having a sort of an annual update from youth outreach. Like, how are you addressing, how do those folks work in partnership with us to address student needs? Or Hispanic outreach, do you have a discussion with them? And it shouldn't be long, but I think those are the things you should touch base with. And is that a common expectation from the board? Is that something you expect every year? This year, we've normally had more, reports from the STEAM implementation at the elementary, or we've had the boat building class or the robotics team. So those programmatic things, or we had the walking history or walking something from the middle school that was really cool. And it gives other staff a chance to highlight what it is they're doing, how successfully they implemented it, what are the challenges they overcame, how much do the kids like it? Has it addressed an engagement issue or an achievement issue or something?
Well, if you look at like the trajectory of how we spread out our meetings, you could have a showcase night for elementary, you could have a showcase night for middle school, you could have a showcase night for high school, or you could have a showcase built into every meeting.
Mhm.
The showcase for tonight's meeting is going to be,
Yeah.
So that it's automatically written into the agenda. Just like we have open comment, just like, how are we bringing our partners of the families and the teachers and the kids into the dialogue so that the work they're doing reflects the decisions we're making?
Exactly. So are you seeing that reflected in the rhythm of the board calendar on a regular basis?
No.
And do you think that's helpful? Is that the right venue? I know we've switched to kind of social media and we've pushed out, newsletter pieces, but I always think there's value to having it sort of live and on camera. And maybe it shouldn't always take up school board time like the demonstrations, because then you could Facebook pushes out to a larger audience probably than a streamed board meeting. But I do think you need to have those, some of those responsible parties come before the board. Sometimes it helps, with recognition in the community, or it's a personal touch. They're like, wow, that's a really cool program. I didn't know that was going on, and create some excitement and some positive, press for. But think about
do you think that would come from Karsten and Lisa putting that into their calendar for the year? and then presenting it to us is something to look at? Or do you think that should come from the board telling Carson, this is what we want to see and this is how we want it to go?
I think that's a $1 million question because
We're
we've,
getting all of it right now.
yeah, we've gone back and forth. For a while, we were really stressing those kinds of things at board meetings, but some of the reports became really long and kind of consumed the whole meeting or a large part of the meeting. And so then there was a push not to do those kinds of things. And so really,
was there a rubric or criteria for what it is we're looking for when you come to the board? Like, it's got to be 5 minutes. We want 4 kids there. We want 2 administrators, a teacher, you know, kind of what they should shoot for when they present? Or is it kind of been a free for all?
yeah, I know that as one of the responses, I did put a time limit on that was not well received. But I think it's one of those things where by the administrators.
Okay.
But I think it's one of those things that we just need to insist upon because part of good public engagement is to know your audience and to present accordingly. So I don't think it's too much to ask for a 3 to 7 minute presentation.
No.
You know, and it can be in person, or perhaps we could
watch a video. They could
exactly. You know, the administrators could develop the video with students, right on there. And maybe that's one way to do it because we do need to, we need to walk the talk. You know, if we expect our teachers to do it, why aren't we doing that with certain things? So
yeah, good point. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I think
Arlen,
that's an
what do you
excellent
think?
suggestion.
Oh, I've been waiting for my turn.
so patient, Arlen.
I did take the time to read through the school board procedures. I'm trying in my mind to understand what we had so far, how much of this is new, or is this a new document, or is this something that was just modified, Carson?
It was taken out of the administrative procedurals manual from a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And so much of it is from there. And then I've taken stuff from other places, like the policy review section, you know, was somewhere else. I don't remember where.
My first thought is I like it quite a bit. I mean, I'm not sure what our workshop schedule is for next year, but I almost think having a full board discussion of school board procedures would be a great workshop for January for our new board members, with 3 new board members coming in. Once again, we're doing an orientation here now already in December, hopefully, but this is how we're functioning. If new board members don't like it, we can have that discussion. And if it's in a workshop, there'd be no decisions made there, but it could be brought back to the next meeting to change procedures if we don't like them. But I think it would be a great thing there with, after having input from the policy committee here now, legislative coming into January, this is what we'd like to see, and have that as a workshop. Second thing, listening on this on presentations from various school groups, teachers, administration. This has been a extremely challenging year, and we've had a lot on our plate for all our board meetings. I personally like to see board meetings be quick and efficient, and I've done a terrible job of being that way when I've been in charge. But get on with our business, do our homework at a time, and just go and make those decisions and not clutter up that evening. I would like to see these presentations maybe come as part of our workshops each month. Maybe for 20 minutes or 30 minutes of the workshop is these type of presentations. And not to say we couldn't do others at a regular board meeting, but that would be, they're not decision-making things, they're informational, and that's kind of where workshops are set up. So that's what I'm thinking.
As kind of like a celebration. Like we're celebrating some fantastic thing that they're going to present to us, and how well it's going, or just as an informational, here's 20 minutes of what we're doing that.
Like the Bolt building that we had with our challenge. I'm going to just say challenge students. That's maybe not the right term, but we've had presentations of what other small groups in our school are doing, different learning things. It's informative of the board of what's going on. We could highlight each school, pick a month for each school to highlight in a workshop. I'm throwing ideas out there,
Mhm.
but we
Yeah,
want to
well,
have
and
input from each school, but would it be better to present them at a workshop rather than the regular board meeting?
And the only thing I think you want to think about with the workshop setting is when we're not virtual, we haven't always taped the workshops, but so I don't know if people tune in to a workshop if it's live stream. I mean, we've typically done it if we're going to showcase, a particular area or particular program or department. It's usually been on the regular board meeting ahead of time or during the meeting, so that at least the viewership is out there. So you're still going to be in a virtual environment, maybe for a couple more, and certainly you might not be bringing in groups to a board meeting for a while, still for months, until this public health pandemic settles down. So just think about that.
Yeah, I think if we do that, we should video the workshop, absolutely, and
Yeah.
it'd be available for streaming at a later time for those that don't,
Yeah.
just like our regular board meetings.
Or the video is a great idea too, that you can make that flexible and then plug it in when you have the right time in a board setting to do it. But so those are the details, but think about, how that fits with the rhythm of the work that you want to see done. And I find it, like the MSBA Leadership Conference always has a musical performance by a group from a school district. And this year it's going to be handbell ringing because you're not breathing through an instrument, you're just percussing. So, that's one way they showcase student talent. And it's a good reminder of like, wow, doing. So anyway, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time because we still have a lot of ground to cover, but I think about that as you go ahead, what do you think composes the work of the board? And does that get reflected in this document here so that everybody kind of builds a common understanding of we should be seeing these things? Often when I went to the building sites, my first question when I would come in and say, well, hey, tell me some good news that I might not have heard otherwise. And so there was one year where I think I urged, most of the live presentations we had was because I urged the principals to say, well, if that would be like a great thing to show the board, the walking history lesson and the STEM implementation, which went on a little bit too long, but it was kind of cool. We got to get out of our seats and we got to go look at, what the kids were doing. But it often developed with conversations with the principal. How could they highlight some good work that was going on in their building? So it's also a feel-good moment for that building or that program and a number of staff and people and kids involved. So I think that's the work of this board too, is to bring that stuff out that maybe hasn't been highlighted. And sometimes it turns into a feature story in the newspaper. Good press for the program is good press for us, right? So it's not entirely altruistic, but it is kind of lifting up and putting something out there. So,
by the way, I'll include a section in there about the videotaping of board meetings and committee meetings. And I'll just throw something out there knowing that, next year's board will need to make that decision, but at least we'll have a starting point to consider.
Yeah.
By the way, I think people are paying attention to committee meetings. I have no idea how many, but obviously we have a lot more people watching virtual committee meetings than we did in-person committee meetings.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Should we talk communications, Article 4? Or sorry, Arlen.
I'd just like to make sure that we cover everything that Heidi took the time to put out on here, what she has addressed here. And I don't want to, because my mistake, I don't want to overlook it. I'd like to make sure we're addressing each of these very valid things.
As long as we hit the high spots, I don't think we need to go through every comment, but thanks. The only other thing I would say is under accountability on Article 2, when it says we're accountable to the community and other stakeholders, I kind of go back to our recent discussion about an equity issue last week that's kind of sitting there with me. How is the board accountable through understanding modern educational norms or expectations? Because I think we're missing a little bit there. And so what does accountability mean? And that's maybe a thought question, but I'm concerned if we don't understand what those norms and expectations are, that we're going to get ourselves into trouble.
There's a lot to be concerned about, Heidi.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be concerned about, and there's a lot of extreme value difference on how people come together to see public education versus I want my child to have this type of education versus why can't my child have this kind of education?
Right. Yeah.
What's good for one should be good for all. And that common denominator typically is what's good for your hardest, struggling, most challenged student is good for everybody.
Right.
What's good for
that a little bit.
what's good for the highest learner isn't good for everybody.
Right.
But we often go towards the middle. In reality, we should be spending a lot of time on how we instruct kids that struggle the most.
There's a spectrum. Yep. Right. And do we understand all of that?
And will the board ever come to a consensus that honestly should be where we start?
Yeah.
Right. I don't know if we will get to that point
Right.
in this board or any board.
Mm-hmm.
Public education stems from that premise.
But that's what we need to strive for. And so I'm looking for any steps that kind of move us along that path. So yeah,
right.
You get it.
So are you thinking like, do we mandate trainings? Do we mandate a book? Like as you join this board, you have to read this pamphlet, right?
Well, exactly. And that's something that didn't come up in our evaluation process was what does the board expect of itself? I mean, so we talked a lot about behavior pieces, but you're right about should we all do this kind of training? Because we're missing this. We're all white middle class folks, and then maybe that's changing with the new board. There'll be some different perspective and stuff. But how do you what is your board goal for yourselves? Like are you going to set expectations about we'd like to see every board member come to leadership conference? And for the most part, we've accomplished that because when I started, 0. we weren't going. And Mike Christensen and I started doing that because mainly we were curious. We kind of wanted some help. We wanted to see what was out there,
Right.
And now we do kind of have that norm and everybody I think gets a lot out of it. So mission accomplished, check that box. So now what's the next step? You want to see everybody on the board go through phase 1, 2, 3, and 4? Because you guys have done phase 1 and 2. What about 3, which is the high performing board piece, and 4 is community engagement? Is that an expectation? We'd like every board member to go to 2 MSBA events. One is a leadership conference, and one is either the summer seminar, the negotiation seminar, or a phase training, or some other webinar. We should be asking ourselves what's going to make us a better board, and there's some concrete steps, that you can do, and that's what gets you on that path that you're talking about.
And there's 2 ways to do it: people's interest and data. And if we were to look strictly at the data from Red Wing Public Schools on our areas of need, that could drive where we need to go. Real simple.
But you get what I call a false narrative is built around the data for some people. They'll look at that and go, we actually had someone go, 3rd grade reading scores, not my problem. It's the family that needs to get themselves
and
to the library.
That's the premise that has to be erased is when you look at the data, what is the reason that there are difficulties in the 3rd grade test scores? Is it because of X? These could be factors, but the bottom line is we need to do better in Red Wing Public Schools.
Right. And that's been our struggle.
Yes.
And you can see that a little bit, right? Yes. So that's what I'm saying about getting into that mindset of, what is the right approach? How do you understand that? So
the right approach is to not blame the families.
Right. I know.
Carson, do you agree?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's not
Um,
just in Red Wing, it's throughout the state. That's, it's an easy way to escape responsibility.
Yeah.
And that's why MSBA's biggest goal is diversity, equity, and inclusion, because we've got that achievement gap, I believe, based on our lack of understanding about what that means. And
You
it's
saw
a statewide issue.
Yeah, and you saw how quick it can turn into real derogatory language real quick.
Mhm.
Try to parcel out support for different groups.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a very fine line.
Yeah. So I'm still reminding myself, I'm talking too much. The only thing I'd say under Article 4, did you want to get to communications, Carson? The only thing I would say under Article 4 is the quorum pieces, the open meeting law. And I
Yeah.
know Lisa put open meeting law into the board or new board orientation packet. So that's in there.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll
and
include
then-
references to the law into our policy.
Yeah.
So what were you meaning in that? Because I was curious.
The quorum piece.
Yeah, like what were you specifically trying to say?
So there's been a misunderstanding about how the open meeting law applies to committee meetings. So if we're mostly board committees of 3, so that means if 2 of the committee members agree on something, that doesn't mean the chair or the third person gets to overrule it. If we, right? You know,
Yeah.
because you guys, we had a difference of opinion about how to assess policy. So you and Arlen thought one way, and so it's like, okay, the majority of the committee, that's the way it is, right? And then you leave it and you move on.
Okay.
But I've been in a situation where Arlen and I have been 2 members of a committee, and the chair of the committee has said, I'm not forwarding that idea. So, I mean, it's contrary to open meeting law
Okay.
that says, well, 2 of us form a quorum or a majority of the committee of 3. So by rights, that idea should move forward.
I was confused on what you were writing. Now that
An
makes sense.
absolute refusal to advance something that one committee said we should be doing.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's,
So,
I don't recall that happening when I've been here where it's been refused to bring forward.
oh, not here, another committee,
Okay,
another board member.
Yeah, I was like,
I've
Test
always-
3.
I've always been involved where it's the committee discussed it, 2 committee members voted in favor, 1 did not, or whatever it is, and that's the way I've always envisioned it. I guess I'm a little alarmed if something can't come out of committee because one person's a chair. I was not aware of that.
Well, think fund balance policy. We had one person just absolutely against it, and it's like, we are, for schools our size, we are behind in our fund balance percentage.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I've had that conversation. I don't think we're where we need to be, but that was one thing that just never got out of committee that we could move ahead.
I
So
thought
that just,
the board.
it's
after-
old business, but
I thought we discussed it and it was just a more or
we
less
have,
that person stated they were against that kind of fund balance and others were in favor of it and we just proceeded on and the fund balance has grown.
but we're only maintaining our policy at 5%, right? And it should be probably 10 or 15. You've said 20 at some point, you know. Anyway, I just think, you know, there's an example of how do you understand how you work together? That's what I'm really interested in. There's always going to be an issue of the day. How are we working together? That's kind of where I live and breathe, you know.
And how I understand it the same, Heidi, is that not one voice because of position on a voting issue, like, well, we voted that person in board chair, we voted that person in as vice chair, didn't give them more leverage on the voting strength. They're more of the organizer.
Yeah, right.
Not the higher vote. Like my vote counts for 2, yours is 1 and 1.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
organizer and facilitator.
Pardon?
Yep.
Organizer and facilitator.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
Not
Yeah.
more power and I say because I'm the board chair.
And it was a committee chair, just to be clear. It was committee chair. So,
Committee chair. Or chair
and
of the
board
meeting.
officer. So,
How do you become the
Um,
committee chair? Do you just say, I'll do it?
The
yeah,
board
if you have
chair
an
usually
interest or-
determines that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the only other thing I would ask, like, or if you can, you said it here, but I think you need to say it a little more plainly in your chart on agenda preparation is please ask your questions ahead of time. That's a best practice. I know you have here individual board members contact the chair or the superintendent if they need additional background information. And that's on Fridays. I'm usually emailing you my questions over the weekend or Friday or Monday. So I'm not on the schedule either for getting that done. But anyway, I just think if we could smooth that out a little bit, it would shorten board meetings because you kind of know ahead of time where the areas are.
I think
Yeah,
we're
and
at a disadvantage with Monday meetings.
I think, we've been
didn't know
headed that way because we've gone great strides to try to have our board agenda and everything out the Wednesday before the meeting, rather than having to come out on Friday, because you can't have time to answer that question if you didn't read it till the weekend and stuff. So that seems to be consistent with what we've been trying to do over the last few years. And Carson's done a very good job of getting that information out early. And certainly you don't like having things change later on, but when we know that there's something coming up that will have updates, it's noted that there'll be further updates on Friday or whatever it is for that item. So we've come a long way with it. So
Yes,
yeah,
we have.
I'm on board with it.
Yeah. So I'm willing to
What
move
I
on.
could do, Heidi, is say something like, encourage board members to ask questions before the meeting, or ask questions if possible before the meeting, or something. I'd hate to be too clear because, maybe during the conversation, all of a sudden there's a question that pops,
Right.
that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'll kind of soften it, but I can include something like that in there.
Okay.
And probably also follow up, it's maybe in here that you will note the clarification to all board members, or when appropriate. I don't know what the wording is, but you've been doing
Yeah.
it. It's not like somebody just getting their question answered and nobody knows what's going on. It's you got to follow that as a communication to the entire notification process for the meeting, such as the press and everybody else that's on that list.
Yeah, and that's actually a recent change because for years, I would just respond to the person asking the questions. And so that's one of I've really thought about that over the last year or two. And so I'm kind of working on that. But yeah, if I get a list of questions from somebody right before the board meeting, I think I should either present the information during the board meeting so everyone hears it, or respond to all. And so we're getting better there. We're getting better with that process because I do think it's important for everyone to hear the same info.
I think it's your discretion on what type of question it is. If it appears that everybody's in a fog about what's going on and doesn't know, then everybody needs to. But if it's just somebody can't understand one concept of something, it doesn't necessarily need to go to the entire board for clarification. Not on every single question. I guess I'm not seeing that need for everything. I think I guess if somebody asks the question, well, if they don't understand, then there probably is others too. But I think there are times when quick, simple answer can be given without going with everything too.
Yeah, for example, where's the information about school board and committee meetings in the school board procedures booklet? I don't need to respond to everybody about that. I could just say, well, it's on page 6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Did you catch that you've got 2 Article 4s?
Yeah, I'll change that.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for noting that.
I'm like, am I seeing double? Which could happen too.
You were seeing double, yes.
So is there anything under communications? I like I say, I kind of laid out,
This
some
is
of
the
what-
hot button article because
Yeah.
I took a lot of the information in that MSBA evaluation response, and just plugged it in there. And so I think this is something that first, it would really help me if we can come up with the communication protocols.
Mhm.
So at least we're all on the same page. But there's some things that we better slow down and really think about in this particular article. So it's one of those examples of something we don't want to just say yes to, because I want to make sure we're on the same page.
So in the first bullet point, number 1, under response to correspondence sent to the school board, you've changed the language there. It says the chair, school board chair, or the committee chair forwards a copy to the superintendent,
Oh,
not included on the list of okay, I see what you're saying. So if it's a particular issue that's coming to like the operations chair, for instance, and I don't know how often that happens, but
I don't know if it's ever happened, to be honest with you.
okay.
And really, I don't think that precludes anyone else from forwarding that information to me,
Okay.
but just sort of sets an extra expectation for the chair or the committee chair to do that.
Yep. I'm okay with
And,
that.
you know, in case, just to make sure we're on the same page, you know, oftentimes there'll be somebody from the public who sends an email to all board members, but I'm not included on that list. And so people may be expecting me to respond, but if I don't have the email, I can't respond. And so
Right.
that's why, you
Right.
know, the chair would typically forward that to me. I know this, this particular, we've essentially had this in the past, in previous manuals, but I know some respond and some don't. I'm not aware of them. But I know that kind of puts some people in a tough spot, because if they don't respond, then some people in the public might think that they don't care, or, you know, that others are more involved. So again, I'm just going to keep doing what I've been doing. You know, I try to respond, and then I always say you may or may not receive individual responses from board members, and I'm sure all of you are sick of seeing that, but
No,
I don't want to.
I think it's a good message.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's consistent and it's clear, and that opens it up for us if we do want to respond, or if we forgot to respond, or if we thought we responded and we didn't. Right?
Yeah. Sometimes people or board members, I think, will just say, thanks for letting us know, or
I
you know,
appreciate your
something very
feedback.
simple.
Or, yeah, thanks for
Yeah,
reaching
something
out.
like that. So, but I know there are differing opinions on this particular topic.
Right. So I was operating under the previous norm of the superintendent, you know, answers for all of us. So there's one consistent message coming from the school district, and not sort of 7 different opinions maybe being shared with one correspondent. And so I wasn't emailing anyone back, because that's the set of rules I was operating under. But then last year, we'd kind of gotten some emails that seemed to indicate that some board members were responding, and that they were good board members, whereas people like me who weren't responding were kind of the aren't you doing your job kind of attitude. And I was like, but I'm following the rule of not responding, because that's what we decided previously as a board, that that's the way it should be handled. Whereas other people came in and didn't follow the rules. So that left me kind of looking, first of all, it feels like, well, how do we work as a team if we are all following a different set of rules? So then I don't have trust, and now I look like I'm not doing the right thing.
Well,
I'm like, well, shoot, you know. So it's kind of like if we show up to a baseball game and one guy insists that he gets 4 strikes in the batter's box, and it's like, but the rules say 3. And that guy's like, no, I'm 4 today. I'm getting 4 because that's what I insist on. And most everybody else is going, well, that's not how it works. Or like you're the musician who shows up at the concert and decides to play the F sharp, even though there's no F sharp in that piece. And so you get this dissonance. So obviously I'm out the door here, but I think the board it's really important that people kind of land on one operating norm here, because it's really hard when you're not all playing by the same rule book. And
I
I
think-
feel
yeah,
like I was one of the ones that just kind of like got stuck. I don't know.
I honestly think when I came in, reading Carson's response over and over again, a board member may or may not respond, was my cue. I don't know where the rule was that says we don't respond. I'm sure somebody might have gone over it with me at some point, or it was written, but I honestly don't remember. But every time I would see Carson's email, it would say they may or may not respond. That was my cue to may or may not respond.
Okay. And see, that might have been a missed orientation thing, you know, that you didn't get the memo on that. So
Yeah.
I can't blame you for saying,
And
well,
so
I
never
didn't
knew
know it
that I was
wasn't.
doing it wrong because I was just following Carson's lead.
Or
But I know
actually,
board
it goes
members
back
say-
even further than that, because years ago, we put this in play, or just to give everyone just a quick understanding, when I first started here, there'd be a message that would be sent to all board members. And then like 5 or 6 of the board members would conduct their own investigation. And so like 5 people would be talking about Brad about the issue. And then 6 of them would be asking me. And then 3 others would be, it was, and I calculated it once, that it was like 100 or 200 times the effort, and so that's when we put this in. The problem though is that, and this is years ago, is that some people would get the message that I'd be responding, or we'd have this procedure set up and they would still respond. And so when that was happening, I decided, well, I better change my response to say may or may not respond. And so that's kind of how that went. So I think with the new board, if we just agree, on something, and then I'll put my response accordingly.
And I could honestly say for some new of us, we're more eager to respond. You've been doing this for so long. You're like, oh, this was a question in 2008. Oh yeah, we did the same thing in 2015. So just in a matter of how many times have you had to answer that question?
Right.
Versus a newer person is like, oh, this is an interesting question.
Right.
I think from that, I wasn't trying, because I love to respond to people, but I wasn't trying to say they're bad and I'm good. It was just more like, I like to respond because that's the kind of person I am in my communication style. So I just took Carson's cue.
Yeah. It all makes sense.
And I think there's others that responded that knew the rule, but decided to not follow it. So
this is years ago.
I respond to some emails myself, but I'm very cautious on it because I don't feel it should be throwing individual board members under the bus or anything.
Right.
Depending on what the topic is, there might be somebody saying, I don't agree with the board decision. About, I don't know, COVID going back to school. And I might be in agreement with that person. And depending on who it is, I might respond and say, I am in agreement with you, but the other board members or our board made the decision, and that's just the way it's going to have to be. And I think that's appropriate, but I don't think it's appropriate to say the other board members were fools and they should have never made that decision. And so there's going to be some tact in it, but I also know that there have been people in the past that have written to board members and never gotten a response from board members, and they felt insulted that the board member would not reply to them.
Right.
So
That's what I'm saying. Everybody's got a different expectation. So how does the board want to handle it as a group?
maybe we need to have some protocols on how we respond if we choose to respond to if individual board members do decide to respond to an email in addition to the superintendent, what is recommended and what is not recommended or something.
Right.
I can see where you could, hopefully I haven't done anything where I've gone overboard with my response when I made them, and I maybe respond to 5% or 10%. I don't know what it is.
And like,
Maybe not even that, I don't know, but I also like that I don't have to respond to everyone, because the amount of time that Carson had to take to respond to all these emails we had a month ago, I would have spent, I don't know how much Carson spent, but I take 3 times as long to write an email as he does. So it would take me 100 hours a week to respond to all those emails coming through. So I'm grateful I don't have to. So
and Holly, I get it. Like when I got on the board, there was no rules. I didn't know what it was. So I was eager to respond too, like, okay, we've talked about this and, this is what we're going to do, or the next step or something. But you're right, Arlen, it takes a lot of time. And then sometimes back then it was like, well, I'm going to email my 3 friends on the board. And it's like, I know, but that kind of constitutes a quorum of a committee. And then they weren't informing the superintendent at all times. And this was back in Stan Slesser's day. It was way even more messy, So that's why we tried to narrow it down to a common understanding of who's doing this work, whose job is it, what's the best way to manage it. So you guys know that's out there, but I think you need to come to coalesce around something that makes sense for everybody. And you want to follow best practice, and MSBA will tell you answering the superintendent answering is best. So, you're going to have to think about that. I think, and that's a big one, because you all want to be you want to be following the same rule book so that it's consistent to the public. You have consistent expectations of one another. And right now I would say it's wildly inconsistent. And it's just hard for, it might be working for some, but it's not working for all. So I think that's all I'm going to say. I've heard what you guys have said, and it's, everybody's got a piece of the truth here, and it just needs to coalesce around something. So thank you for listening to my historical perspective, because things have gotten better, but we kind of still need to improve here. And I hope the new folks kind of take this seriously, or kind of build some understanding about what that looks like.
Am I wrong to say that I've observed, I know what I've observed, but each board chair kind of steers the board work how they feel like a board should work, and then everybody else has got to switch gears and grab an oar to wade in the water with that board chair. And I don't mean it in a negative way. Arlen, you had a style.
Right.
I grabbed an oar and went with your style. Now Pam has a completely different style. I got to grab an oar, but sometimes I don't like the style. Like, wait, am I wrong to be observing that that's how it goes? Not that's how it should go, but that's how it goes.
Yeah, if it was only stylistic things, I think that's just human nature, but I think there's things that the board should agree to or memorialize. Like, I would hate to see next year, and this is just a wild example because it's not gonna, but to say, you know what, I'm really not invested in superintendent evaluation and just not do it. It's like, you don't want to get rid of a best practice norm, right? You want that to stay consistent, because that's going to lead your district down the path of being a high performing, focused on student achievement kind of thing. And because you're going to settle these other things because you've arrived at that norm.
Does MSBA have a best practices for board chairs, and like, do they have a practice sheet that people can kind of follow? Do they,
they have a board training for officer training. There's training for officers. Board chairs get a Q&A session with the executive director at the leadership conference every year. They provide a lot of guideline with that, and I think we shouldn't all leave it on the board chair. I think we should all kind of build our understanding again of what we expect of each other. Like back to, what do you expect in a consistent year? Carson's got the administrative side. We're going to examine this. We're going to examine that, and those things are ongoing. What is the board? What is part of the work you expect every year? Like earlier, we talked about those department updates. So when I got on the board, I'm not sure that we really ever reported out, that the district didn't report out through the school board what our change in applications for educational benefits was. So when the 2008 recession happened, and then 2009, we start to see our poverty rate, our measurement of poverty in the schools go up. I think the board really wasn't really aware, because we didn't report out that number. And then finally, when we, the teachers, staff were understanding, oh my gosh, things are changing here. There's more family struggle. There's more difficulty learning at home. Look, and now our free and reduced numbers are 38%, 42%, 50% coming into kindergarten. And And we reported that out to our local legislators because they were unaware. Kind of
If you're in this
kind of in
meeting
your
right now, this will be the last
middle
one,
class
good,
lane.
and anytime within the next hour.
Okay, sounds good last night. Okay, thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
And so, do you expect, because to me, that was a big measurement. That was a really important to pay attention to because it would change the delivery of our instruction, right? It would change what students needed. So what did we need to give students, right?
Mhm.
But there were a lot of people that just were like, oh, it hasn't affected my household, so I'm just not aware of it. But it's data. It was one of those data pieces that we weren't really like catching on to, and as a district, it kind of caught us by surprise that this is a big change now. And we've never, we're still in that mode, right? 12 years later. And there again, we had the false narrative, the misunderstanding, the statements about not our problem, that your child's not achieving. And it's like, no, that's actually not correct. So do you expect to receive in October that data point? Because it's something I always ask for, but others don't care about receiving that information. It just isn't. So it's things like that. What do you expect to be reported out? What is meaningful for the board to discuss? So you're right. If you're chair of a committee, in the legislature, you're determining the agenda. And that plays politically. I'm not saying that's the case here, but chairs do have some kind of, a little bit of leeway, but there's things that I think the board should always be doing, like the board self-evaluation, the superintendent evaluation. You should always be hearing site improvement plans. You should always be hearing building updates. And if you're missing those in those community partner reports, then you need to nudge the chair and say, well, I think we need to see more of that, and here's why. Here's why it's relevant. Here's why it's important. This is what
That's why I
gets
was asking, the board chair should know all of the policies. Like they should not memorize, but board chairs should be aware of the policies. They should be aware of the protocol, like facilitation and guidance in that direction.
Yeah, but everybody's going to have their strengths. Like some people run because they're going to straighten out finances. Financial watchdog. So they're not going to be the policy wonk. But you should be building together a common understanding of, what the rhythm of your work is.
This brings me to one policy question. When we were doing the open comment, we changed it. People had to call in, but now we're letting people video call in, but we haven't changed the policy or amended it to any degree. It just says they will phone call in, but now we're letting people talk, come on the screen. And when we were going through that in June, we weren't allowing people to come on the screen.
So public comment is different than a school board report within the agenda.
Public comment, we voted on that in June.
Right. That they could call in.
That they had to call in. But now we're allowing them to come on the screen and speak to us with their face showing. But we haven't addressed that in a policy perspective because we weren't allowing people to get on the screen then.
He wanted to know if there were any meetings later on.
I don't know about that.
District office. He's one of the custodians.
There were several people that wanted to speak and they weren't, they could call in. That's all they were allowed.
Should we iterate him?
Yeah, that was part of the resolution when we went to
Okay, because he asked if there were going to be
board meetings. I'd have to look back through that resolution. Have we let somebody go in person for public comment?
Yeah.
To speak? Wow.
In the last 2 weeks, we let Brent, what's his name? Lexfold.
Or Brent, well, he's the food service director.
Yeah, Ross Lexfold.
Ross Lexfold.
Yeah, Ross Lexfold. We let him do public comment and I'm like, wait a minute.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, like what's going on? Like, and we didn't allow people in the past all summer long.
Hold on just a second, I'll be right back.
Is she in his background? Okay.
She doesn't have any idea.
Oh, I thought I was. Sorry.
I just sent her a text there too, but I'm trying to recall. exactly on it. The chair has discretion on public comment for certain things appropriate to allow things at other meetings. They generally decide not to. And I think what you're talking about is Pam probably made a decision. Well, there was a decision to allow someone to go over to 3 minutes, Kirby, on that one meeting. That's a chair discretion based on the chair's duties. And there was a time where there had to be a decision made to allow public comment without calling in because something wasn't working right. I'm trying to remember all of them, but I think that just generally comes under the chair's authority to conduct the meeting.
Yeah, that's not how we wrote it in. So if we're moving to letting people go on video, then I think we should address it
Well,
instead of just allowing it to morph into that.
I thought it was explained that if they wanted to read
But reading on the phone and being in video person is much different. This conversation is much different than me calling you guys and reading it personally on the phone.
And go look at,
I did look at it recently and it does say
open meeting law. There's when it governs virtual or electronic meetings, in the kind of old fashioned language. There's actually two different pieces and it probably ought to be addressed. So it says if you're doing an interactive TV board meeting with somebody on interactive TV and the majority of you are in person and that person's just kind of calling in, you have to be seen and heard. But in this platform, the virtual meetings that we've gone to, it only says heard. And I've had this conversation with Gail Gilman at MSBA because she's the one I asked and she's the one who pointed out the kind of the two different takes about, and those were two different amendments to the open meeting law. And so one says seen and heard and one just says heard. Now I think it's kind of weird if we're not all there because I think it's literally a transparency thing. Like we should be on video. And then somebody said, well, I didn't see you. And I said, well, I was probably eating those cheese and crackers for 5 minutes in between meetings, I was trying to do.
That's what I'm trying to point out. There was a time when we didn't allow people to get on the video. Yeah. Now we are, and I want us to be consistent.
Yeah. So, and they may see it.
We ever did anything on that, did we? We wanted to allow them to do in-person presentation of their public comment. And I guess what is the problem? I don't know quite how this is handled everything through, but what is the problem of them being seen versus having them read it themselves?
There isn't a problem. There's not a problem, Marlon. What I'm saying is we need to be consistent. We told people no before, and now we're letting people do it. So consistency would be we're moving forward with the policy. We're not having as many people online. We're able to have more people come on the call. That's what I'm saying. Before it was shut down, people only got to call in. But now we're opening it up.
I wasn't aware of that. I guess they always could just request to be read their at the meeting and.
No.
Karsten, how do you see is calling in mean either audio or video, or I'm not sure how the law sees it either.
We voted.
And maybe we're with Polly on this one. And that is, it doesn't matter as long as we're consistent.
Okay.
So I think that's where, and we can talk, I can look back through the resolution to see if it said something in particular. But yeah, either way, because we don't want to give one person an advantage because they're seen on video, because that can be very compelling versus someone who just calls in or wants Pam to read it. So I think it's just a review of what we're doing.
I don't recall anything the way Holly is saying, but it could very well be that. I think the intent was to make it as close to what was going on when we had in-person meeting and somebody would do public comment. They would stand at the microphone and they were there and you could see them. And I believe that's the way it was working to this, or why it's being done this way. And people had the option of having it read by, I don't remember the resolution. I don't remember.
We have to go back.
That's why I wanted our policy committee to be aware of this. So instead of us, going to a board meeting, and when we voted on that, it was like, we can't have everybody come on the call. It's going to take too long. We're going to have technology issues. We'll allow them to call in.
Right.
So now we've not addressed it again and we're letting people video call in. Okay, that's fine. I'm just saying, let's continue the movement forward. Because to say to somebody 2 months ago, well, why didn't I get to call in and be on video? Why does this person get to now?
Okay. So yeah, I think you're right. It was tech driven with the narrow broadband, and now we have capability, which is better. So maybe we give people an option,
Yeah.
just so they're right,
We move
right,
the
what they're
policy
comfortable with.
forward.
Yeah.
I believe they're required to call by noon or 1 to the board chair.
They have to submit their writing, that they have something written, and Pam has to read it prior to them being able to read it to us. Do we want to continue that?
Yeah, another related one is that the correspondence can be sent either to Pam or to me,
Right.
which can complicate things because, I may have 3 dozen emails within the last 3 hours, and then I miss something. There's some complications.
They could submit it to you or to Pam or to Lisa. But
Yeah, Lisa might be the best one because then it's one person kind of controlling who has what. But then I guess Pam also needs to review it to see if
it got
she has questions.
Yeah, it got super heated in June around the teacher from Twin Bluff. And people were very heated. And so people were not allowed to come on in the video. They had to call it in, submit their letter. And now we're all of a sudden just allowing people to pop on and say we have public comment.
Gotcha.
So I want to move forward with the policy in time, or go back to the policy and say, no, we're going to stick with this through distance learning.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. I think it needs to be examined in this virtual environment. But you know what? To some extent, we're building the airplane as we're flying it. So good point. I mean, this is developing. And I think we just need to acknowledge that too, that we want to reach some consistency level of, so how are we managing it that makes sense for everyone?
Yeah. Do we want to revise it, or do we want to go back to what we originally stated?
If you're addressing issues, I know in early August, I believe it was, I conducted the meeting and Pam wasn't here. And for them to call Pam to get on there didn't quite work. And I'm trying to remember how that was accommodated for sure. But certainly if we're addressing things, that should be looked at. But I'm trying to remember all this stuff, but I think in general, the chair has the authority to make the decisions on public comment. And I assume went further to, I'm trying to remember, I sat in on some of this, but to get this approved earlier, and I'm trying to remember why it had to be read ahead of time versus somebody just saying they wanted to do public comment. Because we do require you to sign in for public comment before you can speak at an in-person meeting.
Right.
And because of all this, it had to be refined. And I think it just fell into the chair's duties to take something and make it work. But
I think what happened was that people were extremely stressed and heated, and there was some fear that people would call out other people and they would be hiding behind a screen, or there would be an awkward way for the board to say, I think it's because we were new at it. So in safety, we said, let's just do it this way, have them call in, but they have to submit the letter. Are we wanting to move away from submitting the letter and they're just open to call in and talk to us on video? Just moving forward as we stay in distance. Because I don't know if anybody has predicted that we'd be in distance this long.
Right.
And we would have moved back to the old way. I just want to, stay focused on how we're handling that.
I think another factor in that was we were always checking with other school districts to see what they were doing. And I think I copied that from one of the other Big 9 schools as far as reading or writing it. And then thinking, I'm sure, was, if the board chair read it, then obviously they didn't need something in writing. So I think there was maybe I don't know if it was really a conscious decision, but,
reading of it ahead of time is that you cut it off before something inappropriate came out of it or something, because it is, if I recall right, there was some concern if there was some comments addressing other people, identifying other families or other children or students, which we can't do, to make sure it followed the policy of public comment is what I'm trying to recall exactly why some of that was wanting to be read ahead of time.
There was a lot of heated emotion and opinion about some decisions that were being made. And the excuse I think where we came up with, which worked, was that technology wise, we couldn't put 50 people on a screen.
Mm.
It wasn't working. We were being shut down. So we streamlined the public comment to a phone call.
Well, and I think it's time to, you're right, to re-examine. So what have other school districts, experienced? How can we overcome this for fairness, transparency? And Arlen's right too about, well, we asked this in the physical environment, what are we doing? And how does that translate into virtual environment? But we're not going to solve that today, but I appreciate all the pieces that you
It's just
thought
a
of,
policy that I wanted
because
to look at.
you want to be consistent. And
Yeah.
I'm more comfortable hearing people with the visual, because I'm a visual person.
Yeah.
So
And I meant to bring it up earlier, but I completely
Yeah.
forgot when Mr. Lexfold got on. I'm like, wait a minute. Why is he reading his public comment to us on this?
And Kirby
Yeah. And then
Right.
read his
Yeah.
as well.
there was a couple other ones that jumped in there after. And so I'm like, did we change it? But I didn't see any memo that we changed it. So I wanted to bring it to this committee for us to review it.
yeah, it really does need to be re-examined now that, because we're probably going to be doing this for a couple more months. And, so MSBA is a non-governmental entity, but we are probably going to be doing more virtual meetings in the future, because it means you don't have to pay people mileage and overnight and meals for 15 people to collect in one place. So is the virtual going to make sense for committee meetings in the future? I'm not saying, I'm not putting in for mileage or anything, but there has been there's some cost savings here. Or is it easier? I think the big driver is, does it really make it more accessible to folks to do it this way? And Carson said at the beginning, we have more people dropping in on virtual committee meetings than we ever had. You'd never see anybody show up, rarely, at a school board committee meeting. So what is your, how do you manage public input, that way? Because this could be ongoing in some virtual sense and not always an in-person meeting. Or say there's inclement weather. It would be ridiculous if you want to maintain the meeting, can you do it if you're socked in by 20 inches on the ground, but you still have a need to maybe get this done. And now we know how to do it virtually. So what are those things? And we may get some guidance, from the state, with the information services about how they see open meeting law being applied, and, that kind of thing too. So,
Public comment.
all right. Carson was taking notes, I'm sure.
I am actually.
I know.
I think we're on page 10 of this document.
Yeah.
One thing or two things I'll point out under questions about board agenda topics.
Yep.
The last sentence says written documentation will be available to members of the public.
What does that mean?
So, for example, well, and I may want to cross that off until we know for sure, but I believe there's an expectation that, for example, if Heidi and Holly were talking about a particular issue before the board meeting on Monday, then that correspondence should be available to the public in some form or fashion. And so I'd have to do some research to see what that exactly means. And I'm kind of torn by it, because if we're talking about solar garden, leasing high school land for solar gardens, I don't want to go back 4 years and compile every email about that issue. It will drive us nuts. And it really isn't helpful. So what I'll probably do, yeah, it's not doable.
No.
So let me write this down as a thing to, hold on a second. Remove. I'll remove that last line for now until I know exactly what it means.
Okay.
So, and then under public comment, I think this is probably one area where we could really look at together. And, I think I like if we have a truth and taxation hearing, we hear from the public. We always have public comment, but in my mind, it's always really awkward if we're talking about COVID planning, that you have that at the beginning of the meeting and not during the meeting when the actual right before the topic is discussed. So I think the city, Arlen, do you know if the city does it differently? Do they have like periods of time when the community can talk about an issue right before the issue is discussed?
I think it's up to the board chair to decide if they will let them speak about the topic at that time versus at public comment. I think that's what is written there, and I don't know what's there. I thought that's what we kind of have here too. It's up to the chair whether or not, in general, it's just a lot simpler not to have members of the public addressing things, but there might be in a certain bid or something like that where you might want to have somebody's expertise come in. I haven't attended the city council meetings for over a year, so.
I remember one example we had at the school board was changing Twin Bluffs schedule. Was that it? The schedule and or the the grade orientation? And we
Could
did
be.
allow people to speak during that agenda item because we just wanted to feature that. We wanted to give people an opportunity to kind of give their perspective. I think we had several staff. It wasn't, it didn't go on and on and on. I mean, it was pretty focused. We still kind of employed that no longer than 3 minutes kind of approach. But yeah, my understanding about City Hall, the City Council is kind of yours, Arlen. And then my time on the Planning Commission, the only time we let, we would have a series of public hearings. I mean, if we had an item and then, it's that formal process of a public hearing, and then you would get, the person with the proposal, the neighbor, pro or con, and we could have several of those in a meeting, but that's when, members of the public would speak specifically to that but that's slightly different, if it's a formal public hearing.
We had these discussions a little bit when I was chair. I assume
Mhm.
we're referendum planning and stuff, should we allow it? And I'm quite sure it was discussed at a board meeting. Do you want them to address this at the that part of the meeting, or do you want to have it now? I recall that at a meeting asking that question, whether we're going to want that comment at public comment or later, and the board, I believe, wanted it to all be done at the public comment time.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, in response to Holly, it really doesn't matter either way as long as we kind of come up with a protocol or a practice,
Right.
and so, we can decide that together.
I'm your moment. I don't remember what was said back in June or whenever, Holly, but I didn't think we ever put a criteria that it could only be called in on the phone. I don't recall that, but
I looked at it and it said there had to be a phone call in and then they could read it over the phone, something to that extent, because the dilemma was, should we let them get on the video or should we have them call it in? But then it became a technology issue.
Mhm,
So then
mhm.
people had to, that's why we had so many people calling in for public comment.
Mhm.
Until
And-
one day we didn't. And I'm
Yeah.
like, did we just switch this? Did I miss something?
but I don't
right.
know if it came when we were able to YouTube or whatever the meeting out of the regular, or how that came through there. Though they were challenging times on bandwidth at that time, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So as we evolve with, having a little bit more security around this, we can evolve the policy.
Yep.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. Like, we got, just be fair.
And I guess my only concern about letting folks talk, during an agenda item is it still needs to be pretty well managed. You can't let it go on for 45 minutes. Minneapolis years ago had some, issue with the district, and people they just let public comment go on for hours. And they had a lot of people that were engaged in doing that, but it basically, because the board allowed the public comment to go on for like 2 hours, they couldn't get their work done on a budget approval that night. you know, they did this, but the trade-off was we didn't have the more robust budget discussion that we needed to have about pros and cons and choices and levy amounts or whatever. And it really messed up the rhythm of the board being able to do its business that night. It
was
was
that a public
kind of a
hearing?
time limited, so.
Was that public hearing or public comment though? 'Cause
No,
the
it was
there
there.
was a public hearing time for it and you
No.
have all of it.
This was, I sat with a Minneapolis school board member back in my early days on MSBA, and and this was from her. She said it just got so out of hand that we couldn't actually conduct the board business that night. So, and I don't expect an extreme example here like that, but that's part of the management of public comment, is to receive it and not debate it there, or prolong the discussion for 3 hours because it needs to be kept reasonable. So that's my only concern about, you just do need to be smart about managing that.
I like it that Carson's the only one that responds. I like the 3-minute time limit. The question is whether or not we make them do all the questions up front, or all the comments up front, but we don't get to the agenda item for 2 hours. So they make their comment. Do they sit and wait?
Yeah. Right.
Or do they go home and hope to catch it in 2 hours?
Right. It is clunky for them. Yeah. Yeah.
So
That is the trade-off.
Yeah. So if I'm not thinking about math until 7:45, why would I come at 6?
Yeah.
But
Right.
we do not have to take any public comment if we don't want to. That's not what I'm advocating, but
Right.
that is the option of the board if they want to do it. And certainly public input is good. So how far do we want to go? That's the question.
I think that's why we decided just to stick with it at the front.
Mhm.
Kind of appease, we're doing it. Let's just get it. Let's just make sure we get it in the front. Carson responds, we move on for 3 minutes, and I think that's where, okay. It's not ideal because it's not near the issue, but I like that Carson's the only one that responds. Otherwise it could open up all kinds of, shenanigans.
Right.
Right. Because when we were going through the Office of Civil Rights Complaints, we had public comment. And for board members, it was really hard not to respond. And then one board member, that's something the attorney would advise you against, because you may not have the full set of facts, or you don't understand the implications of your comments in responding, to somebody's concern.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
By the way, the next one under communications is handling stakeholder questions and concerns. This one I took partly from our previous work, as well as largely from the MSBA. And I think this is one we should circle and spend considerable time on in a workshop session. Because I think and again, it oftentimes it really doesn't matter as long as we're on the same page. So.
What is it relating to, Karsten? I'm reading it right now.
Like which part of it?
So handling stakeholder questions, is that generic for anybody that is a stakeholder in any situation?
Well, and that's the $1 million question.
Right.
Because I know if I were a board member and someone asked me a question, I would, probably respond, and I think most board members would. So, yeah, I don't know. I think we should just put it on the table and then really talk about it together, with the new board, because I'm not sure if this is workable or agreeable with the current board or next year's board. Yeah, I just don't know. So
yeah, it's because at first I was thinking stakeholders money. So what money are we talking? Like that's how I read it.
Community.
Yeah,
but
this could be anyone.
In whether or not we have chocolate milk or white milk at snack time.
Yeah.
It could be as innocuous as that.
Yeah.
Like I would say, I definitely think we should have chocolate milk, but yes, I get it.
Right. And so the goal in that case would be to have the student or the parent or the taxpayer just contact Brett Lexfold, instead of going through me or a board member or a principal, just talk,
Go
but-
directly to the source.
yeah, and that's easier said than done, I will say. So again, this is not, what's listed there is not our current practice, because we've taken a lot of I took a lot of what MSBA said and infused it. And then I just wrote stuff. So this is, like I say, we have to circle this one and really
Right.
go
And
back
this one,
together on
I
it.
remember being a new board member and sitting down with Stan and saying, what is the expectation? Because I shouldn't be solving like one friend's problem with their child, right? Because that's not my job as a board member. Your job is to talk to, but I did talk, this one friend was really frustrated about her child's achievement. And I said, well, look, I mean, you're looking to alternatives, but ask yourself some questions about, are you going to get better services in another county, a school in this county? Are you going to be able to drive your child to that school on a consistent basis and make sure they're attending? Because we don't bus your child there, right? You've got to figure that out. So I said, again, these are just some things I want you to ask yourself. I can't solve this. I should not be your friend going to beat down the door of the principal at the building where your child is struggling. That's not my job. Now, if it's a systems issue, I get it. You told me your daughter experienced racism on the bus. I will report that. I won't advocate for your particular situation, but I will tell you, you need to talk to the principal, you need to talk to the bus garage, or whatever. But I did report it to the superintendent saying a community member has said, I think this was mishandled. My daughter received, racial comments, and instead she was told, instead of the perpetrators being addressed, she was told that she needs to learn how to handle this better. So,
Walk away. That's the thing.
and it's like, so that's a systems issue. If that's our systems response, that's wrong, right? So this is the toughest one. I think this is one of the toughest things that new board members have to understand is I can't respond to my colleague because I'm on the board now, but I can't be your advocate because that's not my lane as a board member. So we, or my neighbor, it's so hard to build that systems response and not appear as if you're doing personal favors for somebody. And I've been in that situation. And I know as a board member, I was asked, a new board member asked me, I'm also a parent in the district. So what does that look like? And I said, number one, you never give up your parental rights to go address an issue, with your student, with that student's teacher. I said, and you're going to have to work really hard to take off the board hat and put on the parent hat. And you also need to understand that people will always perceive you as never taking off the board hat. So, I mean, I think this is one of the most challenging things for new board members to figure out is how do you do this, especially in a small town where you mostly know a lot of folks. And it's hard to say, but that's not my job as a board member. I can't, you're asking me to do something for you as a friend that I'm not allowed to do as a board member.
Mhm.
And you have to develop those responses. And like I said, I think this is one of the most challenging things. What's that chain of command? How do I direct people? And, it can be a really tough spot. Really tough. So yeah, this is going to be a big one about, and I think you guys, I mean, with the COVID circumstances, with some equity issues, because you have 3 board members joining who are very deep into the equity work, and people are having some questions. People want some answers. What does that look like? So yeah, this is going to be a challenging thing for the new board to establish.
I think it's always been challenging.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think this last one, that's probably why it's the last one. I don't think it's ever not been challenging for any board in the history of boards.
Sure.
From the Roman Empire. Well, my sister's, not Roman. Well, you can't, go, it's like the dawn of time. Who do you represent? Your family, your job, your board, where do your loyalties lie?
Yeah.
Should we
question.
oh, go ahead.
Well, we are an hour and a half into this meeting. What time frame can people still work with? I realize we're covering a lot of ground and it's great discussion, but just tell me where we're at. Are you still available? Is the rest of the committee available?
I have a ton of work to do tonight, so I'm ready to jump off anytime we're willing to, and not because I don't want to discuss it. I just have a ton to do. It's December 1st count tomorrow, so.
Yeah.
Well, I think
Next Monday, so I'm good to go.
I hear Lisa laughing, by the way. She's still laughing.
Then I will like get some sleep tonight.
I mean, we could hash out we could go on and have a robust dialogue.
How about if I just point out a couple of quick things with the school board manual? Under policies, I did add or include the 1000 series. That's the inclusive education program. So that's on a yearly review now, which I think is good because then it won't get lost in the shuffle. Under planning, I just added what I think we should be doing. We lost the 2020 year. And so that's why there's so many things that are planned for calendar year 2021. And we'll just have to do whatever we can. And then student school board members, I know Heidi, you've expressed some concerns with that in the past. Can you encapsulate kind of your thinking or concerns?
Well, okay, some history behind this. This program was built in consultation with a number of other school districts and the superintendent and the high school principal. And the board approved it. So what you have here is a modified version because I think there were some weaknesses in the program, expecting the staff to adopt this and foster it. I thought if it helped kids in leadership development and an opportunity for scholarship, that it would be a natural, but I just don't think the passion was there or whatever, to kind of adopt this under a staff, umbrella. So I do think the school board member needs to be dedicated to this. My chief concern at this point, and I'm the board member who built this, so I'll be transparent. Right now, number one, under the application and selection process, it just says apply by submitting an application to the district office. What we had approved was not followed last year in the selection of our current student school board members. And if you don't, my chief concern is if we don't have an application process mapped out that uses an equity lens, we're going to be in trouble. Because the original program was designed that everybody who was interested, after it was discussed in a civics class, everybody who was interested could apply. And that to me means open opportunity for anybody who's interested. So again, if emergent student leadership saw some possibility, they could do it. Other school districts run a student school board member program through their student council. Again, you're narrowing the pool of applicants if you are only taking people that sit on the student council. And I just don't think that's fair. So last year, in order to fill the seats, we departed from what the board had approved, and selected applicants were encouraged from a narrow pool through the National Honor Society. And I'm not against the National Honor Society. I was one of those high achieving student nerds in high school. That was me. But there are other people in other areas that I want to have them to have possibilities too. So we've already stumbled in the equity department quite visibly last week. And I really, really think the district needs to do this with an equity lens, that everybody gets a chance, everybody gets an opportunity. How we do that, I'm not sure. Like I said, I wanted it to be run as a promotion through the social studies or civics departments for 10th graders, so that if you, and do it in the spring, so that you could maybe attend some meetings over the summer and you could start in the fall. And
Is it a
develop,
policy?
what?
Is it an actual policy in our book?
Well, when we had this under administrative procedures, this was a standalone item that the board had approved.
Okay,
I said, this is what it is. I went to the student panel pieces at MSBA. I contacted Marshall, Duluth, Hopkins, Austin, and said, what do you do in your programs? And borrowed what I thought were the best pieces, ran it past Karsten multiple times, ran it past the high school principal, and then the board formally approved it. So right now you're kind of in limbo. There's a bit of a skeleton of a program, but the application process and the selection process was unfair last year.
why?
Because instead of being open to everyone, the program went through the National Honor Society.
But
And
my big question is, why aren't we following our own stuff? Right or wrong, we follow it until somebody says, let's change it.
So you had somebody with the
That's what
intention of trying to fill the seats, but operating outside of what was approved. So if you wanted to fill the seats, you accomplished that. I think having 8 people do it was too much, because it's too much to manage. It needs to be manageable for the school board member who's going to be the liaison on that, in that position. And then you kind of need to, foster the kids along a little bit. So I'm just saying the board needs to think about, what does this look like? Can it be operated with an equity lens, and how do we implement that in the practical level? Yeah, go ahead.
The system fell apart for whatever reason because we didn't have people, is my understanding. I didn't feel it was equitable or fair what we had before, because you had to be somebody that certain staff members thought was an exceptional student to get on the board, student school board. I'm also very alarmed with what you're telling me now. I was not aware that you had to be part of the National Honor Society in order to be a student school board member. I was not aware of that.
No, you're not. You're not. By our rules, somebody made an independent decision.
What the place you said was National Honor Society went through there. My gosh, if that was the place, now I know why it took me until I was 59 till I could be on the school board, because I was never a part of the National Honor Society. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't that smart. So I had to wait till I got to be old to run for school board the other way.
So anyway,
I don't like what we have now. I think it needs to be revised. We need to come up with it, and we need to find a way. But the system that was there before, only certain students that were on the upper chain of command, in my opinion, were selected for school board members, and that wasn't probably correct either.
well, that certainly wasn't in the rules. If that's how it was implemented, that's not the way it was written to do that. So that's again, like,
people that are trades oriented are going to want to bother with being a student school board member. I don't know, but
I think there's
is come up with a revised format that does what you're asking, Heidi, because I do believe we need to get students students need to have the ability to be in the process regardless of where they are and what they are.
right.
So
Ran it through advisories.
What's that?
Run the voting through advisory class. 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade advisories. That way everybody should get the information and then have an opportunity. And if students are on OJT or whatever, they still have an advisor. So the advisor can still get them that information if it's something they're interested. They could show a 5-minute video clip of what it's like to be a student on the school board and have the kids fill out a 1-page application of why they think they'd want to do it.
Right. So there are some good basic application questions. Why do you want to do this? What do you think you can get done? What skills would you bring to this job? And it was
Google Doc. I mean, you could make it even easier as a Google Doc.
Right.
The teachers could say, download this, do you want to do it kids might, perfect, I'll do it.
Right. So you do want, I think your larger principles are, you want to elevate the student voice. You want to provide a path for diversity, because that's not always what you're getting if you're from this pool of kids, right? So diversity to me means opportunity for everybody, because you may not be a top A student, but boy, you are a passionate advocate for your other students, right? Your fellow students, you will go to bat for that. I mean, that's the kind of voice that we should, want to offer opportunity to, and they have to see it for themselves too. So there's that, but so, I think it's,
Who
I
selects?
think as we wade into equity pieces, it's going to be more visible when it comes to student programs. And it's a good example for us to model that we are doing this with an equity lens, who benefits, who's the disadvantage. And if you run through that, and MSBA had like an equity webinar like 10 days ago or whatever, and they had that sheet, what's the equity lens sheet, you got to ask yourself some questions. How are we doing this? Because it's a really prime example for elevating the student voice, demonstrating diversity, and offering a path to achieve that. And if you are only handpicking, or the advisor for a group is handpicking kids, that's not the way. That was not my intention. I don't think that's representative of a public school district. I don't think that's the right path to go. So I think you're going to have to work on this one too.
Who's on the selection committee? How do the kids get selected?
Well, originally they were the 10th grade civics teachers were supposed to offer that opportunity. Now I'm not sure if we're capturing the whole student body that way. So that's another thing to think about, is, it would be great if we could partner with a staff member who had the time and energy to kind of adopt this and work with a school board member. Maybe this year it's just in transition because COVID, because energies have gone elsewhere, and we have some student reps, and maybe we can address this in late winter, early spring, and then get some school board members for next year. The other thing about, so they were supposed to get word of it in social studies class. Then applications were supposed to be made available to anybody who wanted one, fill them out, turn them into the office. And then we would go through and we didn't get a lot of applicants. And then we would conduct some interviews, or, we sat down, it was me and the principal and a couple of people from the social studies department, civics department, who sat down and kind of looked over the answers. And basically we still, filled seats. I mean, sometimes we were short one, but we still got 2 juniors and 2 seniors, for the most part. I don't believe in recruiting out of a certain pool of students. That to me is against the principles of equity. And that's my chief concern here. I'll add to, so I used to chair the student school board member scholarship for MSBA. And the essay those applicants have to write out, and they're all top notch, but mostly what weighs most heavily is the essay, where you want a student school board member to learn the 5 standards that we all have to pay attention to, right? Advocacy, accountability, conduct, and ethics, and whatever the other 2 or 3 pieces are. Have you learned those, and how have you applied those? That's what I would like to see developed in our program here. Are you learning some leadership development at the board? I want to see more than you learned how to show up on time. I hope you learned that at your first job when you were 15, not when you're 17 and going, oh, I have to show up on time, because we get those answers. So again, I have aspirations for this program. We've kind of stumbled through it. I still believe in it. It's an opportunity for a student to win a $3,000 scholarship. It's an opportunity for leadership development for the future for these kids. It doesn't always have to be a high academic achiever. I mean, there are other strength areas that we should be lifting up.
Are you going to chair it once you're done with the board? Are you going to stay on as chair?
Oh, no, I have to leave my MSBA job.
Mhm.
I'm leaving 2 years of directorship on the
You
table.
have to?
Yep. Yep, I have to have standing in the school board community.
I was wondering
And
how
once
that
I
worked.
walk off this board, I have no standing.
Okay.
So. And to that end, as we are developing orientation materials for our new school board members, I believe we should have a scaled down orientation booklet for student school board members. So they can learn the difference between a governing board and a management board, or where's that line between governance and management on a school board. What are the 5 principles of a good school board member that they should be standards that they should be looking at? Again, I don't know that everybody's going to dive into this, but I have seen some outstanding examples of kids who really got it. And you want to, again, lift that up because that's going to improve your community long term, right? Or they're going to take that skill set wherever they go and improve another community. Anyway, this is one of the areas I'm passionate about. I'm sorry if I'm talking your ears off. But I really think, if we just, we want to do this right. We want to do this.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. I think it's actually should be going to a broader audience, I think, than civics, and I understand why you started there.
Right.
Like, I completely get why you started there
The
because
intent is that we would try to cover everybody in a
Right.
core subject, but
Right.
I like your suggestion of maybe advisory is the place to do it. But I think a board member is going to have to kind of write that out about what it means to be a student school board member, what are the expectations? Because I think it is difficult for a staff member to describe the work if they're really not involved in it, right? So I think
And what it
that's the
always
weakness
does.
of the program that needs to be addressed.
Mhm.
Yeah. So if you guys have thoughts on how to improve this, I think this is something else the board really needs to be smart about. And it would be an opportunity to discuss why we do things with an equity lens. Because if you only recruit from a small pool of kids, you're not being fair. You're only offering opportunity to this slice. And that speaks to your point, Arlen, like, you can't determine ahead of time, or you should not be determining ahead of time who gets a shot at this, because that's not fair.
Okay, can I jump to the next thing? Thank you very much, Heidi. I do appreciate that backstory.
Okay.
So that when it comes up in the future, there's a reference point.
Yeah.
An evolution of, this is how this has to move forward. No more detours.
Right. Thank you.
I just wanted to let the committee know that I won't be at the last meeting, the 21st. Because I'm having surgery December 15th, and I'm going to be done talking to people until about January 5th. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
good luck with that.
Thank you. Yeah, I have to have my jaw broken.
Ooh.
Yes, they're going to crack them and move them forward. I have sleep apnea, so it's like this whole ordeal, but I can't breathe at night because my throat is too close to my jaw. And they're like, well, we have to just break your jaws then. I said, oh, just like that? Just a quick crack? I said, no, it's about 6 hours.
Well, now's a good time to do it. I mean,
Yep.
first it's over Christmas
Yeah.
break plus distance learning, and
Yeah.
it's a really
I'll
good
be
time.
wired shut for about 6 weeks, so I don't know when I'll be able to actually be able to get on and talk. But I won't be at the 21st because that won't even be a week later.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
whatever happens, I wish you the best of luck, Heidi. And
Oh, thanks.
yeah, it'll be a big transition for you, but you
Yeah.
worked your butt off.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Love the work. Just need a change.
Yeah, we all feel that way, Heidi. I hope you know that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Do you mind if we jump to the administrative procedurals handbook real quick?
Nope.
Holly, I know you need to go, but it'd be nice to go over the data privacy and sharing section if we could.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's under Article 5 on page 23 of that manual. So I'll give you a lot of this stemmed from that survey that was sent out in, I think, late June in terms of parent perceptions of if they wanted to be in distance learning, or why they wanted to be in distance learning this fall. It was the kind of the return to school survey. And so I sent out survey results to parents, and then we shared it at the public board meeting, and I got a lot of feedback from friends of mine, by the way, friends and colleagues of mine who we're really concerned about the sharing of that data. So, and I have to tell you kind of the metamorphosis of all this is, we're right in the middle of COVID planning. So at first I have to admit I was kind of frustrated, with, why are these questions coming my way about this issue? We really have to focus on the plan, the reopening plan. And then later, I thought more about it and I thought, oh, I kind of see where this person's coming from or that person is coming from. And then the third stage of this was a really good discussion, I think, that we had in this policy committee, if I recall correctly. I don't remember the month, but it was a great discussion. And then the fourth phase, now I'm kind of excited about it. If we're going to do this, let's do it right.
I
So
think
that's kind of,
August.
August, yeah, that sounds about right because it
Yeah.
didn't happen right away. It was August, or I thought it was
Right.
August or September. So anyway, now I'm kind of into it, and I want to, if we're going to do something, if we're going to talk about this, then I really want to do it well. And I think I'm not saying that everything that's written now is perfect, but I think it's a really, really, really good start. So do you mind if I just briefly go over the little subtopics there and then just ask me questions as we go? So I took a lot of data privacy stuff and just put it in one article so it wasn't all over the place.
Which page
And,
are you on?
Page
23.
23, Article 5. I'll give you a second here to find that.
Yeah, I just pulled
So
it up again.
I took
go ahead.
pieces from all over the place and put it in this. I think some of the pieces will have to move to other locations at some point, but at least I wanted everything in one place. The first had to do with directory information. So parents can opt out of the sharing of directory information like their home address, and those kinds of things. But they have to provide us notice. And so I just described what they need to do to opt out of sharing directory information. Not many people here in Red Wing do it, but we want the process set up. And so that's a pretty easy one. The building principal will email the request to Melinda, who will mark the data as private on the student's record in Synergy. So if there's a parent who wants a list of kids in Mrs. Dressen's kindergarten class, they could put in the request for a list of the kids in the class, their parents' names, their home address, that kind of thing. If someone is opted out, then that person won't be included on the list, essentially.
Will their
Depending
name
on
be
what-
on the list?
It depends on how they word that directory information.
Okay.
So there are some parents who maybe have moved from out of state and they're really worried about a spouse finding them. And so some will actually opt out of, even sharing the name. Or sometimes it's a home address or whatever it might be. So that does happen from time to time. The next section is student surveys administered by the school district. And this is just a reminder that policy 520 governs that kind of survey. So if the school district's going to survey students about whatever the issue is, we have to look through policy 520. And the next one, 5.3, is an issue that came up fairly recently, where there was a student who surveyed other students for a class project. So it was a perfectly legit thing to do. It was a good learning thing. But we didn't have well-defined procedures in place. And so the student didn't do anything wrong. The parent didn't do anything wrong. But there were some complaints that came about because of it. And so I just put that down that, students are expected to obtain prior approval, if they are going to do a survey of that type.
No names.
Yeah.
It seems to me we might have had a situation of this being done when we were talking about high school starting time and different things with our student school board members. There was survey reference or somehow or other they got information that students favored or didn't favor starting earlier or later, and I didn't see a big problem with it, but I think that would fall under this also. So in other words, students need to be informed they can't do this.
Yeah, there's a process.
Yeah, if the student school board members just did it themselves, then it would probably be 5.3. But if the school board said, or the administration said, hey, student school board members do this survey, then I think that could be construed as being administered by the school district. So we would just take the most cautious approach.
Survey on emails, so they know.
Yeah, well, one thing I learned is that students at the time had access to every other student's email address. And so, during school or out of school, the students sent that survey out, without receiving prior permission. And again, the student didn't do anything wrong, so don't get me wrong there. But that kind of led to various discussions internally about what we should do with that. One thing that I did put at the end there, students are not allowed to ask for another student's name in the survey,
Right.
for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
The next one is maybe more pertinent to what happened this summer. This has to do with parent surveys. And I've gone back and forth. I kept changing it, and I'm willing to keep changing it. So, I need to hear feedback from you guys. I think there are some surveys that that are just so routine, like signing up for parent-teacher conferences. I don't know if that's really a survey or not, but there are some things where we just need to do that. But typically, what I want is employees to obtain prior approval before administrating a survey to parents. And then that employee provides me with a PDF version of the proposed survey, as well as a written plan detailing the purpose of the survey and explaining how the results will be used. So it's crystal clear up front. The reason I say PDF version, in case you're wondering, is that a lot of surveys now are done with Google Sheets and Google Forms, which is great. The problem though is that those can change, with time, and so I just want a snapshot of the actual survey itself, so I can just keep track of it more easily.
Got it.
And then what I have down now is that this committee would review the survey in advance if the survey asks or retrieves demographic data such as gender, race, free and reduced lunch status, or disability status. And as an FYI, I just kind of want to avoid all those demographic pieces altogether if possible. So I want to be clear about that. But who knows? There might be some times when that is requested. And so I'd like this committee to look at it. And then my assumption going in is that no demographic information will be requested from parents or retrieved from student management system. Now, there's, there are going to be some kind of gray areas in this. For example, I think we'll need to run a return to, we need to find out from parents if they're planning to send their kids back in person for second semester in the elementary schools, because we need to know first if we have the bus capacity to provide transportation, and even more important, where the kids requiring special education services would be placed, because we have caseload counts to worry about. Then we have to worry if their siblings can go to the same school. Do we have enough rooms in each school? It's a very complicated process. Thankfully, by the way, Carly and Kayla kind of have run that since August. They're amazing getting that stuff done. But we will need to pull, like if a parent gives us that information, if they say, yeah, we want to come back in person if you guys are in person, then we do have to look at their address and their disability status just to, for those reasons. So I don't know if that'd be really, well, I guess that would be retrieving demographic data.
But it's not the second step. The second step was in the surveys is when it came out, the people that want to go back to school, 25% of them have students with special needs. That's not information that the public needs to know.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So if you collect that data in-house and parents are aware that they're filling out this survey and they're filling it out for this purpose, and you keep it in-house and make your plans that way, I don't see an issue with that.
Okay. That's good to know.
I mean, it's just when it gets out, like, well, what do you mean 25% of the parents have special ed kids? Who would that be? Well, it's got to be so-and-so, and it's got to be so. It turns into the snowball of none of your damn business.
Sure. Well, maybe I could rephrase this, yeah, let me think about that and, rephrase it. Or maybe it's one of those things where we start running some of these surveys by this committee just to kind of get a pulse of what people are thinking. I don't know,
Yeah, so in
something.
the tagline, it's like, we are conducting this survey for one. We want to get a number count for who wants to, two, we are asking you to provide your, child's special ed status or your child's 504 plan status or, pertinent information. 3, this is not going to be shared with anybody except for the data management team, which includes Carson Anderson, school principal, that type of, so there's not a gray area out there of like, who shared what with what?
Right.
And, if
And
you
this
don't
is
want-
in-house planning. This isn't public consumption. This is just
No.
in-house planning, right?
if
I mean,
you don't want to be part of it, fill out this form and push no.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Now that's
explain
the,
why you're
That's-
asking for that information on the request, right? I mean, I think that's some of the sensitivity that we didn't pay attention to, the first time around, that for planning purposes, we need to know about placement, just as we did, to start the year, not the survey, but to start the year, it's just some practical planning pieces
And
about,
it's helpful. However,
yeah,
it's just got to be handled like, you would want your own child's information handled,
right.
right?
Yeah, the only catch is that if there is a data request regarding survey results, then,
Give me an example.
well, I'll give you an example, like the, and this is very different from than our survey. So I'm not trying to explain our survey away. So, but the state actually released all of their survey results for everyone in the state who had filled out, the survey for return to school. And in there, they went, I think, by county or by school district, and they actually showed how each person responded to each question. And so now obviously the names weren't there, so people wouldn't be able to figure it out. But it was raw data out there except for the student's name. So that would be one example where somebody might be filling out the survey thinking, okay, well, it's going to be confidential, no one will ever see any of it. But in the end, if there's a data request looking for the survey results, we may or may not have to share it, or there might be different perceptions.
Wouldn't that be a disclaimer at the bottom of the survey or at the top?
Yeah, and that's what I'd want to,
Yeah.
and that's why I think, maybe for a period of time, this hasn't been approved yet,
Right.
but maybe if you're okay with it, if I could run some surveys by this group, even individually. So like if we come up with a survey tomorrow about this return to school, maybe I could send it to the 3 of you and just say, hey, what is your feedback? Give me some, what are the red flags?
Yeah.
And then we can make adjustments. And so I think I can just do that without, we don't need this approved in order for us to start doing that, so anyway, and maybe after we kind of get it going, then I can memorialize it. I'm sorry, Arlen, for babbling so much.
well, I just want to say first, for you to run it by 3 committee members, whether we think this should be done in our school, I think it's a violation of open meeting law.
Yeah, we wouldn't discuss it.
Committee without having a committee meeting. Just a thought, but I know it's not practical. It seemed to me I'd rather see that if people can be surveyed, they should have to opt in, not out, but I know that's not realistic. Thirdly, Holly, I'm sorry, but I don't feel that the district did anything wrong in that survey and what the results were. It didn't identify anybody. I don't want any big discussions, but that's my opinion. And fourth,
Explain it in your
I
opinion.
do not believe that a legislative committee should make a decision for the entire school board whether a survey should be taken. That's
We're
if
not,
it's a board decision, it's a board decision. I don't think the committee has that power. And fifth, I think we're very slow to react if something wants to be done by these people. And whether we should run it, we're
I
forcing.
find Arlen, I find that your I don't want to say anger, but kind of your approach is disrespectful.
I don't have any anger. I'm just telling you my opinion on this.
And
I
I'm
think-
telling you, it's disrespectful for the multiple people that I've represented on this. It's not just
And
me.
You're doing what's right, and I respect that. I'm just saying, in my
But
opinion.
you're just telling me that I, say it out loud to the whole community.
I will then. You want me to make an announcement at the next board meeting? I will, but that's not what I'm here for. I'm just telling you, you're saying you think it was wrong. I have
I
not.
didn't do anything right now. I didn't bring it up.
Well, we were addressing the survey that identified X number of percentage of people on it.
We shouldn't be doing that in our policy meetings.
Saying I don't think it was a problem.
That's the committee we're on. If it makes you uncomfortable, join another committee.
I'm wondering if I could come up with or suggest some sort of rewording of that section. Because I think both of you, actually all three of you, make some good points. If I could rerun that paragraph, because I think, Holly, what I'm hearing from you is it's not necessarily asking for the information, but it's that I shared it, like the parents and at the board meeting. And I think that's what concerned you as well as others. In the same way, like Arlen said, it may not have been improper. Some would say yes, some would say no, but I think it was loud and clear to me that it was, I would do some things differently next time. And so I honestly think I can rework that paragraph so that, we can do it quickly, and yet still get feedback from committee members as needed, or maybe a better explanation. I'm actually pretty confident I can come up with a good paragraph there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do want to have some sort of gateway for feedback, because we feel like, different people had different opinions, and it was, clunky, and it didn't work as smoothly as maybe we would have wanted, right? So I
Right.
think we're still in the feedback loop, and we have one more meeting in December where we can maybe just nail this shut. And I don't know if you need this sooner rather than later, Carson. I
I would say
Um,
rather than
but
later.
you're not going to be there on the 21st. So,
Well, but he wants to push this out sooner rather than later.
right.
Right.
Is that,
And
Yeah.
I can kind of, we can start implementing it internally. The only part so far is that second paragraph under the parent surveys as far as what we do. Let me, I see all multiple perspectives there. Because how are we gonna?
People review it, or
I'm sorry, Arlen?
are human rights people review it, the survey?
Maybe. I think the key part is like what Holly said. It has to do with sharing of the survey results. And well, no. A couple things. First, parents ought to know what's happening with the survey.
Absolutely.
We have to give a clear description of what's happening, so that we know what we're going to do with the information, what's going to be retrieved, what's not retrieved, those kinds of things. And then if it's going to be shared out. And, like Holly said, I just need to come up with kind of a standard thing saying, it's not our plan is not to share out the results, but, as per a legal data privacy request.
It's possible this information could go if somebody requests it.
Yeah, I'd have to come up with a really good wording because I don't want to scare everyone away from filling out the survey.
Right. Yeah.
So, but that's why if you guys wouldn't mind me just taking one more crack at that, I actually know a lot more information now than I did 20 minutes ago. So, are you guys okay if I did that? Kind of reworked it?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, we want to do it
Yeah.
right.
So is
Like
it a
you said.
violation if you send it to us individually, but we don't have a conversation? Or is it not a violation? I want to be clear on that.
Yeah,
my understanding is that I could send it out to the committee members and, include the media in that. And then I could
Mhm,
get
mhm.
feedback from individual board members, as
Mhm.
long as there isn't a committee
Group
discussion that
discussion.
leads to now, some lawyers would argue that, well, you're really not making a decision. It's a recommendation of the board. And so some lawyers would have a
Right,
different perspective, but I try to take the most cautious approach.
Mhm.
Yeah, at the same time, I don't want to take any chances with, the open meeting law. So,
Just let us know tomorrow what you choose to do. For whatever reason, like I'm not going to send you it, or I am going to send you this on second thought. Just let us know what you want to do.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm open to that.
one thing that, like I send out updates to the board,
Yeah.
Periodically on a variety of issues. And I think the key thing is that there shouldn't be discussion, about it to formulate the recommendation. But if I send it out and let's say Holly gives me a call and says, oh, you didn't include this or that. Yeah, of course, then I don't want a serial meeting either. So I think that's probably Arlen's point. I'll figure something out within the next week or so. I'll figure something out and send it out to you guys.
By you, I just want to tell you, by you suggesting that, no way in my mind did I feel like it was going to be a serial meeting or a serial email. Like
Right.
I don't email other people once I email with you, that it's my discussion with you.
Right.
So that's how I view you communicating with me. I don't send it to everybody else.
Right.
It's
Right.
just a question you're asking a board member.
Right.
Mhm.
And I'm not lobbying for
No.
one thing or another. I'm just looking for feedback.
Yeah, you're
So,
saying, look at this over, where does this work? Where does this not work? I think it's a perfect opportunity to do that and get feedback and teach us all something about it.
yeah. I'll work on that second paragraph. I know that, unless there's some more questions, I know that you guys we all have some other stuff to do, but
Yeah,
section 5 5.4. Oh,
Mhm.
so these numbers are off. Sorry about that. I've been moving stuff all over the place. Authorization to release student information. Oh yeah, this is an important part of this whole document, and I want you guys to really look at it carefully. It doesn't have to be right now. Well, it can be now and later, but we work with Every Hand Joins Data Mart, and so what we would, and the two organizations we work with would be Hispanic Outreach and Youth Outreach. Those are the two big organizations. And so what we expect from, before we share our student data with the Data Mart, that would eventually go to Youth Outreach or Hispanic Outreach, we expect an opt-in form. So we actually get a student or an authorization to release student information.
Mhm.
And so, so this is kind of how it works or has worked or will work, whatever it is. We get, let's say, an authorization to release student information for a particular student, and it might mark contact information, academic achievement results, whatever that might be. So we take that information and then we set up our student management system to share that out with Every Hand, or with the Data Mart, sponsored by Every Hand Joined. And then the community organizations can access the data just for those kids. So that's kind of the normal flow of things. That's the opt-in process, because parents have to opt into the data sharing. We also, and I mentioned this at a previous meeting, and I did receive a couple of requests from parents who just want to make sure that their student information's not shared with like Youth Outreach and Hispanic Outreach. And so we've devised kind of an opt-out process. So for example, with these two parents, they've already emailed me, so we'll take, we've taken care of it for these two parents, but I'm thinking of, future requests. We'll have a form that they can fill out. They want to opt out of such and such, and then we will set it up on our back end so that their student information is not shared with the Data Mart to share with Youth Outreach and Hispanic Outreach. Did I just thoroughly confuse? Sorry. If you look at the diagram, I think that helps on page 24.
The diagram did help. I really appreciate
Okay.
the diagram because it was like, no, if you say no, this is where it goes. If you say no, this is where it goes.
Right.
Very
Yeah.
mathematical thing for you to do.
Well, unfortunately, I cannot take credit for the chart. Somebody else did it, but it's a lot cleaner to understand than.
Kudos to the chart person.
Yeah, I'll pass that message on. So anyway, I just want to let you know that there is an opt-in process before the student information shared with the Data Mart and then those community organizations. But then it's kind of it's almost like a catch-all or just sort of a second wave if parents want to make sure that they're opting out of that we also have that process in place. I do want to I don't want to is that we work with Every Hand Joined and i3Works in a couple of different ways. One would be the Data Mart with information shared out to community organizations if they have the opt-in process down. But then we also work with them on other data management and analysis services for the district. So in that way, they're acting as school officials, and so parents wouldn't be able to opt out of that part. Because I'll give you an example. We do discipline data, and so we work with i3Works in particular to help us develop these discipline reports that are really good reports. And so then that's what enables us to figure out where the incidents are happening in a particular school. Like, is it in the hallway or is it in the cafeteria or something? We can figure out the timing of those discipline incidents, how many kids of color we might be suspending versus white children, those kinds of things. And that's stuff we need to do. And so we need everyone's data that's fed into that. So in that way, the parents would not be able to opt out of that part of the work. But they should be able to be opted out of any data that's shared with a Data Mart that would be accessed by Youth Outreach or Hispanic Outreach. That part, I think they ought to be opting out of. So I just wanted to be crystal clear because I know there's a lot of writing and I didn't want that to slip through the cracks. So
no, I do understand that.
What's that, Holly?
I do understand that.
Yeah. So I've learned a lot about this data sharing and privacy over the last few months. So, and it's good. I think we have a better process. And so that chart is actually described on a full page on page 25. So if you could read through that at your leisure. It's a little more detail than maybe I would share with parents necessarily, but I think it's important to include all the details so that we're all on the same page.
I think so too. More is not worse on this situation.
Yeah. And then the last one is just data searches. And I figured that was kind of data sharing and data privacy. So I put it in this section, even though it's kind of, kind of a totally different thing. And I believe this is the same as what we've had before, except I named there's a job title change, Information Technology Systems Administrator, instead of the previous job title. So, but please read through that as well, just to make sure we're on the same page. I do not believe in accessing other people's email accounts. I just don't, or their hard drives.
In what capacity?
I view it as a really big trust issue. So I'll give you two examples.
Yeah.
For example, when Beth Borgen retired, I only accessed her documents or email like for one or two things, and I can't remember what they were, but I did not want access to her indefinite access to her email accounts to look through her emails. I just don't want to do that. I do not want to be that person.
Right.
Okay. But there was one or two things where, oh my gosh, we have to understand what happened here. And so we're going to, I had temporary access and I was looking for very specific things, just to accomplish that. So that'd be one. That's probably the primary example. We've had a couple of data requests that involved administrators and school board members. Two of them actually that I can think of offhand. In the first one, I just asked everyone, hey, do you want to provide the information to me so I can share it out? Or do you want me to have Charlie just run the data retrieval for you? And in that case, the school board member and the administrators all said, we don't want to deal with it. We want Charlie to do it. And so then I asked Charlie, okay, do this and this. These are the keywords, and then pull that data for us. Then there was a second request that I think had to do with just school board members. I can't remember all the details. And so in that one, I just let the school board members supply information to me. I did not ask Charlie to retrieve it, just because it didn't feel right to me. And so I just asked the school board members to share what they had that met the data request. So I think in both instances, it went well, but I thought it was important for me to at least share that with you. And again, it really comes down to trust. I would, it's just the right thing to do. So, but if you ever have any questions, let me know.
Yeah, those are good. Those are good examples.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I get it.
Makes sense.
Now, I would just, while we got that there, when we orientate our new board members, I think we should make it very plain to them that their school email address can be accessed. I want to say anytime, that's not the right word, but that it can be accessed, so they should be careful what they do on their school email account.
Right. Well, they should always be careful, but especially with their school email account.
Mhm.
Oh, we lost you, Arlen. You're muted.
Sorry, I muted myself first. The email is technically public data,
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
or can be.
Right.
Technically,
Yeah,
it
no,
is.
that's a good point. So they understand that differently, that it's different than your personal.
Right.
Okay. Boy, we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, I don't know.
Do you have any more energy for the legislative thing? Because we kind of need to talk about that.
Yeah, I get one
briefly.
other thing here. Page 16.
What
Section
page?
Page 16, section 311 payroll disbursements, item number 12. You may want to add verbiage for VIBA in that paragraph.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Ah, yeah.
That's all I had on that.
So
All
Heidi
right.
asked a question about the legislative platform.
Yeah.
I know it's already been 2 hours and 15 minutes. Do you want to keep
Yeah.
going, or?
I have to go out. What was your question around, Heidi? So I can just think about it.
Well, I think we have an approach to, normally we have the legislative platform determined, but this has been an unusual year. We usually have it kind of mapped out with a little bit of story to tell about how that impacts Red Wing Public Schools, why we've chosen this to be a priority for the legislative session. And then we share that with the at the legislative meeting when we get together with the full board, student school board members, and those legislators on the 21st. And so we usually pick out, some pieces that affect Red Wing Public Schools, challenges or barriers we've had over the previous year that could be addressed at legislative level. We often check and I usually do the background work on this with the 4 different advocacy groups out there for public education. So the Association of Metro School Districts, Minnesota Rural Education Association, we are a member of that group. SEE, Schools for Equity in Education. We are not a member of that group, but several districts around us are. And MSBA, of course, right? They all put out legislative platforms. So MSBA's isn't out yet because we're going to determine that on Wednesday night. We're not determine the full legislative platform, but a lot of pieces we need to pay attention to in this session. And then we try to see where everything overlaps. So we kind of have some common messaging amongst those advocacy groups that makes sense for Red Wing Public Schools. And so it's just kind of what the legislator is going to hear from us. This year, we don't really have that, and I think there's some good reasons for that. We're, again, just a very highly unusual, unprecedented, right, uncharted waters. And I think the focus is going to be on funding, making sure that we secure some funding in the year ahead, 2 years ahead of the biennium decision. So I think MSBA will be focusing on hold harmless and the general ed formula, the compensatory revenue formula. We always pay attention to special education for funding. Mental health for students is a big one out there. So anyway.
Do we know?
So right now,
The platform money.
Yeah. So, okay, I have some more bad news on the money. The November forecast will come out tomorrow. So pay attention to your newspapers. It'll tell you just where they think that deficit number is for the state. And it's going to be anywhere between $2 and $5 billion. So the state has taken in $805 million more since May that they kind of didn't know if they were going to get or not. But the tax receipts have been better over the last 3 to 6 months. However, the governor says all options are on the table to correct the state's outlook. We do have a state reserve here. $2.4 billion is in reserve. That's kind of the rainy day fund that the school district would also have with our fund reserve policy, right? So that's out there. And then what is the role of the feds and dollars coming forth to help the public, especially public education? So I'm going to suggest that since we don't have, we have some general, funding concerns, mental health for kids, we can put those together. I think maybe though what we should focus on is COVID impacts for Red Wing Public Schools. So the compensatory dollars, if you count our students that are 130 down, and the finance committee decided that it was really going to be 170 less students this year. So that's 40 students that we budgeted for that we think we're not going to have. So we're going to lose another $400,000. And then the compensatory revenue, our numbers this year will determine what your funding is for next year. So that could be another $460,000 sitting here with our most recent figures. I think those numbers have some big impacts, and they should on us and our community, and the legislature need to really know what that is. And I share those data points with MSBA too, so they can tell a little bit of Red Wing's story. So I would my recommendation is focus on COVID impacts and tell them kind of some of the big hits that we've taken and some of where we've saved money and balanced things out, but it's still, the big hit is still hitting deeply, right? And then the second recommendation is Sherry Johnson is the co-chair of that working finance group. I would like to be able to have her present sort of a mini lesson on what that might look like and some of the high points for our local legislators. Neither one of them sit on an education committee, Barb or Mike, but Barb's in that kind of education space a little bit because she was on the education committee in the House for a while. So that's kind of what I have in a nutshell about, what we maybe ought to focus on come December 21st.
One area that I think I would like them to answer, if they're coming with abilities to answer questions, is what does the economic stimulus look like for small communities like Red Wing? What kind of dollars are businesses getting? What kind of support are people getting for daycare? How are they helping the community, which ultimately helps the public school? stay
Mhm.
afloat during this time?
Right, I think that's an excellent question. I think that's a good one to have some dialogue on at that meeting, and we've booked in. Oh, so you're not going to be there though? Shoot.
Right,
Well,
that's why I'm
you
like,
better
you
write
know,
that down.
like the platform literally could be money, and this is all of the ways that we're impacted as a public school, but also it's our constituents. How
Right.
are people surviving this? What do you know about their numbers? What do you know about the unemployment in Red Wing? What do you know about, kids that are in poverty? What do they actually know? Because if they don't, they need to find out. And then they also need to fill us in on, what kind of money is coming to our community. What can we as a school district rely on?
Mhm.
Where are you
Okay.
fighting for us? That's all I wanted to say about like that. Is
Yep.
the whole big picture is money, but there's lots
Yep.
of different moving parts.
Right.
But I
So I
really-
wrote that down, so we'll make sure something along that line gets asked.
Yep.
What is the community help, right?
Yep, and I trust that you guys will jump it in there, however it works. But if
Yep.
they come at you with some kind of big talk about something,
Right,
your eyes are going to glaze over. We want community talk.
right. Arlen, what's your
Well,
feedback?
A couple things come to mind, and I don't know what it is, but if we're down that many, oh,
I
that
gotta
many-
go.
Yep, thank you.
If we're down that many students, are those students regular ed students? Or are they special ed students? So is that going to run
Oh.
a bigger? I'm putting the assumption out, most of our special ed students are still going to be here. So
Hmm.
that's going to increase our ratio of special ed, non-special ed, and our cross subsidy numbers in the future. And maybe I'm totally off base, but I just wonder if we should ask that question of the right people. Is this gonna affect us with this many not enrolling? Are they special ed or other? The other thing is, every district, I think, in our state, is going to be suffering financial issue.
Mhm.
The legislature obviously doesn't seem to have any money. I mean, they have some money, but only half of what we're gonna be going backwards. Is there, it should have probably been put out in our legislative policies or whatever, what we might ask the legislature. Is there any chance that we could put a non-voter approved COVID-19 levy per student over the next, I said, thought 1 year, but 1 year isn't gonna do it, if numbers will be big. Over the next 4 years of $100 a year, so we could maybe get $400 per student come back to our district for COVID-related expenses over the next 4 years, coming out of a non-voter approved levy on the tax bill. And that's not great, because anybody
Right.
listening to this is gonna say, hey, he wants to raise our taxes, but we need to look for options to survive. And $400 per student on 2,500 would be $1 million over 4 years. Maybe that's too big. I'm just throwing pie in the sky numbers. And sometimes we got long-term facility maintenance is, oh, they gave us all this money. They didn't. They allowed us to levy non-voter approved money against our taxpayers to pay for maintenance. Is there going to be a way that we can, or is there another way to get some COVID money?
Well,
Yeah.
they're still trying to wait on the feds,
Well, they don't have any money. They're writing out blank checks.
well, they're allowed to do that. The Minnesota state government is not.
Yeah.
And then I haven't heard that idea, Arlen. I mean, I've heard the
Well, I haven't either. I just
board
came up.
approved, can the board and MSBA would back that. Can the board approve non-voter, right? The board would approve the last levy that the last referendum. I'm talking concepts, not actual,
No, I'm just throwing out idea.
Yeah, and the other piece was increase safe schools levy because of the mental health issues. And I think there's a position out there that says the MSBA thinks that's a good idea, is to increase safe schools levy or give local authority to do that. Because of and that would be one way to capture like the mental health issues specifically. But Yeah, I don't know. That would be a really challenging one because you're challenging a
policy
tax
that
base
does
that hasn't been
COVID.
able to pay into the state. You know, I mean, the economic engine is so slowed down across the state that, you know, but I think they're going to have to dip into that rainy day fund, and you've got Showalter in charge of commissioner of finance or whatever for the state, and then you've got Doty in charge of Department of Revenue, and they're both problem solvers, and they'd like to not touch that 2.4 billion, but it's like I think you're going to have to. I mean, this is the rainy day for the rainy day fund, right? But they shouldn't gut it either because it's going to be a recovery period, right? So you always come up with a different idea, Arlen. So it makes people think about what are those solutions out there.
There's no denying everybody's hurting financially. That's the right, and the drawback of what I just said, if it got approved, is the people in our community are hurting. Some are, some aren't.
Right. Right.
But we do have the business levy part of it that might be able to help us on some funding. I'm not sure how Excel would fit into that, but it's probably a terrible idea, and probably people in the community hate me for even saying it. But I'm looking at all options for revenue.
Right. They said all options would be on the table, so I think these are the kinds of things that they need to talk about.
And maybe you don't want to call it COVID-19 levy because that would be non-voter approved. You got to come up with a name that sounds a little more appealing, like
Yeah.
student wellness,
Mm-hmm.
student wellness levy.
Yeah. So anyway, are we good with moving ahead on kind of the COVID impact data that I expect Jackie and other administrators would have to kind of package up? And, you know, what we have to leave it to your discretion about what has the most impact, you know, what's impacting students the most, you know, and I'd like a mental health piece in there too. You know, if we're and are you able to draw the data, Karsten, on Arlen's question about gen ed versus special ed? Is that quantifiable or?
You know, I can certainly ask Jackie.
I'm curious. Yeah.
You know, we did not cut our special education staff, and so much of our revenue is based on those expenses. It's not on a, you know, particular student. So I'll ask her to see, you know, what kind of data pull she can do with that in mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Arlen, are you good with, you know, like Sherry taking some time? You know, it's kind of unique that we have a co-chair of this high impact finance working group right here as the local expert. And, you know, it'd be nice to offer her expertise to, you know, these legislators, saying, if you ever have questions, this is kind of what we're looking at, big picture, and have that resource in our own backyard, so to speak. Because that's one way to develop some legislative clout, is to build that local connection and offer the local expertise. So I just think that makes sense to kind of connect the dots. And so I think we always try to keep our time tight with them. So if, you know, we can go through the COVID impacts for like 15 minutes, and does it make sense if Sherry did like a 15-minute, you know, or a 10-minute thing with 10-minute questions, and then maybe we just have some leeway in there. You know, we usually try to offer the student school board members an opportunity to ask a question or two, and then a little bit of more freewheeling question and answer kind of stuff. Does that feel like it's doable in that 1 hour block that we have?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
maybe
so
Heidi, would you mind? Maybe the two of us can connect with Jackie and Sherry, and we'll
yes,
figure out a game plan.
that was my next step. Who wants?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Definitely.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I'm not saying our special ed dollars would go down. I'm saying that our regular ed dollars that cross subsidy into special ed will be a smaller pool to tap if that is what's happening.
Right.
That's the concern.
And you're approaching it from the dollars, Arlen, but I'm also afraid that other people will look at that situation and start pointing fingers and saying, see, once again, you know, we have one group that is taking dollars, you know, the special ed group is taking dollars away from the general ed group. And that's the conversation I want to avoid because it looks like we already dipped our toes in that. So I just want to be really careful about and respectful about all of our student populations.
It's unfortunate that's not the intent. The intent, if
I know.
we were properly funded on special ed.
Yep, you
I
get
should
it.
also note that Goodhue County Ed District had a $66,000 per ADM. Either it's was just in the paper, either that's next year's budget or past year, $66,000 per student or per
Mm.
ADM is what they operated on.
Mhm.
And I think we were at 12 or 13,000.
Right. Oh, but we're back to a high need student versus other need student, and
I'm not complaining about it. It was just an
Right.
interesting financial statement.
right, Right.
I thought it was $66,000 per ADM.
yeah,
And ours, you know, obviously it's a lot more than with special ed dollars, it brings it up or whatever, but I think we were up at 12 or $13,000 per ADM, which is what's sticking in my head. So,
Mhm.
you know,
Okay, well,
are we all virtual next Monday with truth and taxation, or do we need to, are the people that are doing their, if anybody wants to speak in the public hearing, that'll be done virtually. Is that correct?
Jackie and I will be at the middle school in case there is a community member who wants to make a comment, then we'll have it set up so they can make the comment right from there.
Okay.
Board members will be virtual.
okay. Did you push that information out into the public somehow?
I know Jackie has been focused on that and has a plan in place.
I
Okay,
think we should let Republican Eagle know that. It might be able to hit the Saturday paper.
Yep, that's part of it. Yeah, as Republican Eagle would be front and center.
And I
Yep.
think they'd be very accommodating if we would let them know sooner rather than later.
Right.
all right, thank you for hanging in there this long. We got a lot of ground to cover.
Thank you. Heidi, I don't know what we're gonna do without you. I really don't. You're just such a pillar here with this legislative and policy and do such a great job, and I really do appreciate it. I want you to know that, so.
Thank you.
And I feel bad because I don't know how we're gonna thank all our outgoing board members this December with COVID and stuff too.
Yeah.
I doubt we'll do justice to what we should be doing, but I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Yep, love doing this work. That's why I did it. Yeah, it's still gonna be weird, isn't it? It just, there's no getting around it. And
Yeah.
you know, the weirdness of this year. So last week I learned I have a niece that's pregnant, first child, she and her husband, really exciting. And then I learned I had a cousin about my age that had a brain aneurysm. They took him off the ventilator and he died the day after Christmas or after Thanksgiving. And he's my age. And I'm like, gosh, you know, I mean, what must that family be going through? They lost, you know, I have an aunt who's going to bury a child. Her husband's got Alzheimer's, so my uncle probably won't even know that he had lost a son. You know, I mean, so I'm like, okay, this is weird. I can do weird, you know, but there's still so much other stuff out there that other people have to deal with. It's really tough. So just trying to get perspective. It's kind of taught me a few things this year. Pared down what's really important. So
Just remember the good things that you did and that we did in this committee and the school board. You have to keep remembering that.
yeah, we'll.
Don't focus
hate
on the
to be
gaps,
leaving, but-
focus on what was accomplished.
So yeah, I look back and I think I did okay. So
Oh, yeah.
thank you for
Thank
hanging
you.
in on a long meeting, and we'll
Yep.
see you next week.
All
All
right.
right, see you later.